the Golden State San Francisco Warrior fan from as long as I can remember, and I want to congratulate all the other Warrior fans who are either recovering from last night's victory or here with us this morning. And also congratulations also to all the people from Cleveland. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers played a remarkable game yesterday, and there's something we can all learn from teamwork and not deciding that you're a superstar and you want to let somebody else have their share. So hopefully we'll learn those lessons here in the legislative arena. We're going to start with a brief oversight hearing with the Department of Toxic Substance cost recovery effort. Now, last year, the California State Auditors released an audit on DTSC's cost recovery activities and found that there's nearly $200 million worth of unrecovered state costs. Now, in September, this committee conducted its first hearing to discuss the audit and its recommendations with the department and the auditor. Today's hearing revisits that discussion to get a progress report on the department's efforts on the cost recovery. After we have the oversight hearing, we will convene the legislative hearings, and we'll start with a special order of business and hear the Assembly's Environmental Safety and Toxic Material Committee's 4 bills, AB 273 through 276, which makes statutory reforms to DTSC's cost recovery process. And then we'll proceed with the rest of the file. So there's 10 items on today's file. Item number 6 for everyone here, which is AB 323 by Assemblymember Olson is on consent. And with that, I'd like to convene the oversight hearing with DTSC and welcome the DTSC Director, Barbara Lee. Good morning, Director Lee. And welcome members.
I would like to inquire, did you match today? Was this part of the memo? Very impressive.
And green, I would point out. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As you said, my name is Barbara Lee, and I'm the Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. With me today is Ms. Terry Hardy, my Special Assistant for Program Review. I would like to thank you for having me here today to talk about our progress implementing the auditor's recommendations regarding our cost recovery efforts. We've taken these recommendations very seriously. As you know, our primary mission is protecting public health and the environment, but we're also charged with managing the state's funds responsibly, and the recommendations in the audit report addressing them is one of our highest priorities. In the past year, working with resources approved by the legislature, we've made significant progress, and I'm happy to outline that for you today. If you'll recall from my presentation in March, since 1987, we've spent approximately $1.9 billion to clean up contaminated sites in California. About 10% of these costs were not reconciled, and that created a backlog of unresolved costs. In March of 2013, the department publicly disclosed that backlog. Initially, we determined that the backlog was about $184 million at 2,700 sites in the state that were cleaned up between July of 1987 and December of 2012. Subsequently, the auditor's findings, which included another year of data, set the backlog amount at $194 million. That $194 million in unresolved costs owed to the department, included funds owed to the department as well as payments or costs that were not properly accounted for or documented. Meanwhile, our work had reduced the number of sites from 2,700 to 1,621 at the time that the audit was released. The auditor made 11 recommendations for improvements, and I'll update you on the status of those recommendations in a moment. First, I wanted to talk about how the backlog occurred and some of the steps we've taken to resolve it. Until recently, standardized cost recovery procedures did not exist at DTSC. Computer systems used by people in the field and people in billing were not linked, and the information often was not shared. Sometimes cleanup efforts were initiated to protect public health, and cost recovery was not pursued until sometime later, sometimes significantly later. Project managers, that is the scientists and engineers who oversee the cleanup, were also put in charge of recovering the costs. Not only does that require a different skill set, the time that they would spend on cost recovery competed with the cleanup work that protects the public, and they often would prioritize public health over cost recovery. Once we publicly disclosed our backlog, we began an intensive effort to determine the scope of the problem, and we started implementing changes to standardize and improve our cost recovery procedures and better define internal roles and responsibilities for cost recovery. In the current budget, we received $1.6 million in 14 two-year limited-term positions to evaluate and take action to reduce unaccounted-for costs as well as improve our procedures going forward. Some of the employees hired under that budget augmentation are administrative project managers. Their job is to take over the administrative work that the scientists and engineers had been asked to do in the past. These APMs, as we call them, now act as a vital hub in the wheel in our cost recovery efforts. A key step was to make sure that all of the staff involved understands and follows our procedures for recovering costs. We standardized our process by developing 27 specific and detailed cost recovery procedures to ensure consistent and rigorous pursuit of reimbursements. We trained everyone who has any role at all in cost recovery, and that's nearly 400 staff people, in the use of these procedures. Later in 2014, 200 of those staff were given additional targeted training. We created a centralized electronic tracking tool that provides a visual dashboard of performance metrics. It monitors workflow and identifies bottlenecks and measures progress in resolving costs. Now I'd like to update you on our bottom line cost recovery numbers. These are represented in the pie chart in your packet. It looks like this. As I noted, we have spent approximately $1.9 billion cleaning up contaminated sites in California since 1987. Of that, we did not resolve 10% or $194 million. As of the beginning of this month, nearly $60 million of that $194 million backlog has been resolved. This includes more than $6 million in cash collected, an accounting of sites where we've determined there is no viable person who can pay the bill, and data errors that we have cleaned up. That means we have resolved an additional $8 million in costs since I last updated the committee 3 months ago. In addition to the amount resolved, sites accounting for about $67 million in unresolved costs have been referred to the Attorney General's office, are being prepared for legal action, or are in bankruptcy. As we continue to analyze our backlog, we anticipate that more costs will end up in litigation and will result in more dollars collected. The auditor recommended that the department look into writing off small balances of $5,000 or less. DTSC has determined it costs more to pursue those costs than can be collected from the responsible party. AB 274, which you are hearing in this committee later today, would allow the department to write off a significant portion of unresolved costs up to $5,000. Those sites would total about $1 million in unrecovered costs and include almost half of our remaining unresolved sites. We have prioritized our cost recovery work, focusing first on sites with costs of more than $1 million and those sites where the statute of limitations will soon be expiring. We are on track to resolve the remaining $66 million by the end of the coming fiscal year. To summarize, in the last year, the department has resolved or referred for legal action nearly 2/3 of the unrecovered costs from 1987. Turning now to the audit, of the 11 recommendations made by the auditor, 9 called for action by DTSC and 2 recommended action by the legislature. In the 10 months since the audit report was released, we've submitted mandatory reports on our progress as required in October 2014 and this past February. Another report is due in 2015. At this time, DTSC has fully implemented 6 of its 9 recommendations. There is an updated status chart in your materials. Looks like this. You will note the sections that are highlighted in yellow. Those sections reflect the progress made since the last time I updated you in March. Among the actions completed, the department developed an electronic reporting system to monitor statute of limitations dates so collection opportunities are not missed. We established settlement tracking procedures to ensure agreements and the resulting payments are recorded and the billing system is accurately updated. We also standardized the way the department conducts its searches to ensure that all responsible parties and project proponents are identified and invoiced. There are 3 audit recommendations we have partially implemented. One recommendation calls for the department to update our policies and procedures on liens. As you know, a December 2014 court decision questioned whether our lien process violated due process. DTSC is working in conjunction with the Attorney General's office to finalize a revised lien policy this August that addresses the court's concerns as well as makes other improvements. Another recommendation calls for DTSC to review the accuracy and ensure the data before putting the information in our fiscal system. We are conducting this review as we analyze each site in the backlog. So far, the review has been completed for sites totaling $127 million of unaccounted for costs. In December, the department learned that Fiscal will be unable to meet our billing system needs. We are in the process of identifying a platform that will meet our needs, and we hope to begin building that system in 2017. Finally, the auditors recommended the department investigate its authority to write off outstanding backlog costs of less than $5,000. The auditor agreed with the department's analysis that found it was not cost-effective to pursue those small amounts. DTSC has drafted guidance on writing off costs under $500, consistent with state policy. But in addition, the Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee introduced AB 274, which authorizes a one-time write-off of small amounts receivable up to $5,000. If that bill becomes law, it would allow DTSC to write off nearly half of the remaining backlog sites. The state audit also recommended 2 actions by the legislature. The auditor found that the department's interest rate is too low to adequately discourage late payments. Assembly Safety and Toxic Materials Committee's AB 273 would authorize DTSC to increase its interest rate from 0.249% to 10% on late payments, and that would be 7% for local governments. The auditor also recommended that the legislature should give DTSC the authority to require additional information from potentially responsible parties. Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee's AB 276 would allow the department to collect information regarding a party's ability to pay and determine whether to pursue cost recovery. Looking forward, in the coming fiscal year, we are on track to resolve the remaining $66 million in unaccounted for costs. That's associated with a remaining 583 sites. We will continue to work on sites involved in litigation and settlement talks. fully integrate enhanced cost recovery procedures into our program work. And some of the ways we're ensuring we don't build another backlog include assuring voluntary cleanup agreements and/or unilateral orders are properly executed before the department accrues any cleanup costs. We're reviewing and modifying as needed all draft invoices to make sure they are accurate and defensible in case we have to take legal action to recover our costs. We're reviewing our grant requirements and our state Superfund contracts to ensure adequate funding and accurate invoicing. We're promptly tracking and addressing aging receivables. And we're working with legal staff to track and act upon sites where statute of limitations deadlines are approaching. In the past, our cost recovery problem was identified and re-identified, but only quick fixes were implemented. What those drills lacked and why our solution is different now is the fundamental change that we are bringing about. I and my leadership team continue to push forward on comprehensive reform. We're making sure all of our procedures are clear, complete, and effective. We're training staff on the new procedures, and we're underscoring the importance of accountability and transparency at every step. We put in place a tracking system to monitor and ensure that the process is followed and will be followed into the future. Thank you for your attention. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer your questions now, or I can wait until after the presentation by the auditor.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. It shocks the conscience to think that we, as a legislature, set up a system where we want people who are in code enforcement to also be debt collectors, and then we're shocked that didn't happen. I think the decision to put public health and public safety over debt collection, if I'm playing Monday morning quarterback, is probably a good deal. I know that we've provided slots for temporary to address this backlog problem. So the question is, and you've highlighted how you've trained people and it got more targeted training going forward. Once we get into fiscal 17, 18, or wherever the amount is the permanent staff the division of power going to be so that we still have code enforcement really doing code enforcement and the debt collectors doing the debt collecting work?
It's an excellent question, Senator, and I'm taking a look at the structure of the cleanup program and our cost recovery efforts. We're monitoring the progress. I need to have a better understanding of what the long-term resources we're going to need will be before I make any judgments about whether we need any of these resources to become permanent. Part of that depends on the effectiveness of the training. Some of it may also depend on my ability to shift existing staff around so that I have the appropriate non-technical staff working on these issues going forward. But if I find I need additional administrative staff on a permanent basis, I'll make a proposal at that time.
The other thing, I know I don't want to get into the hearing on the bills, but it is in the auditor's report the $5,000 cutoff, and I think that's the traditional small claims action. Since this is sort of my background, there is a $5,000 recommendation that you be able to write off this bad debt, but if you actually put the resources in, which are already limited, it may cost you $7,800. Now, I'm not that smart, but why would I spend $7,800 in resources collecting a $5,000 debt just so I can feel good for the next audit report? I mean, that's, the bottom line is that I lost money. Do you have, I guess my question would be, is how many sites fall into this $5,000 to, let's call it $8,000 arena? Is it a limited, because you're asking for some authority, and we'll be dealing with that later on to strike or to.
So there are 565 sites that where we have unrecovered costs per site of less than $5,000. So that is about half of our remaining sites that we have unaccounted for costs. We also, it's about a third of the total that we started off with a year ago. The observation is a good one. I think the recognition that it costs more to recover those debts than we can collect from them is part of the reason why there are so many of them that have lingered and we haven't pursued them. That's not necessarily the best way to resolve the problem, but it's the way that the department did resolve it over the past. I will say that there are times when it is worth the cost to go after a small debt. We definitely don't want to send a signal to people that they get a free pass if they're under $5,000. And sometimes the message that you send by recovering costs in specific cases, it's important just from an overall standpoint of enforcing the department's requirements and helping the regulated community understand that those requirements are going to be enforced.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with you. What we're doing is we're basing a state auditor's recommendation to give you legislative authority. So in my point of view is that if somebody owes the department $5,001, that you are duty bound to go after that person and spend $7,800 with a prayer that you may collect something from a 1992 debt, because they just happen to, we're a base 10 society and we love these round figures, and we've got a big mess here and we're trying to clean it up, and I'm just trying to explore, somebody plucked $5,000 off the shelf, and that's grand. But how many sites are we talking about? And if we moved that to 8 or we moved it to 9, you can go after somebody who owes $100 if that's the authority that you have. We're trying to work out that relationship between the executive branch and the co-equal branch of government, the legislative branch. Other members of the committee, questions?
Just a couple thoughts. Obviously, to catch this on the front end saves you a heck of a lot on the back end. And so I appreciate your recognizing the importance of doing this. And, we just have far too many people who have taken no responsibility whatsoever for creating the conditions that they have, many of them being our larger businesses. But I do agree that it is a mindset, and if people feel that if it's under $5,000, they can get away with it. So I understand and support the decision-making that might also include statements that maybe it costs us $5,000 to get $5,000, but hopefully if it has a wider spread impact, that would be a good thing. My concern, though, is that I think you said that you received $1.6 million for 14 limited positions. My understanding is sometimes it's hard to get the kind of dedicated person that you need to do this job when they know that it's a limited time frame, and that after training a lot of these folks, they go off, and I don't blame them, to jobs that have more job security to them. So you do the training and you incur that expense, and then they go off and get a more permanent position. I'm wondering if you've found that experience here, and if there's anything that we could do going forward to try to minimize that sort of shrinking pool of committed people, because the incentive to do the work is that they're quickly looking for more long-term expectation.
Thank you for the question, Senator. There certainly are challenges in working with limited term position allocations. I will say we very much understand the reservations of the legislature and others in the administration about providing new permanent positions to the department until we can demonstrate that we're using them responsibly and we're using these resources responsibly, and that's what we're trying to do right now. We actually have been very successful in our recruitment efforts and have gotten some very good people to fill these limited term positions. We do lose them. They do move on, and that creates challenges, but we've been very fortunate with the people that we have been able to bring on as limited term staff. I know that my special assistant would be very happy to keep some of them forever because they really are very good people. But we're taking a look at what the long-term needs are going to be, and we will come back with a proposal if we find that we need long-term resources.
Well, my suggestion is that they come on for a 3-year gig, they get trained, particularly industry, will grab up lots of good people after they've been trained, offer them significantly more money than get in the public sector. We're finding this now with trying to, with the oil spill that we had in Santa Barbara, that we didn't have enough people in the fire marshal's office because once they got trained, the industry took them to be their inspectors, such as they are, and paying them 2 or 3 times as much money. So, you know, the competition there from the private sector can be compelling and difficult to overcome. So that was my concern, not so much they stay 3 years and then their contract's up and they move on, but that during that 3-year period, they get a better offer. So I'm wondering
Yes.
how you address that.
We have seen that. To the extent that we have positions that become vacant within the department and we can offer them permanent status work in another position and then redirect that position, we are doing that. And that's about the best we can do, with the constraints that we have. We have lost a couple of good people. It is a setback when that happens. You know, they know that these are 2-year limited term positions. They know that second year is gonna hit soon, and so they do start looking, and any of us would in that circumstance. We're just doing the best with that we can. Thank you.
Ms. Bates.
Thank you. Question, looking at the chart, one thing that concerns me is the $67 million that's litigation and bankruptcy. And what sort of due process, that's probably a little bigger than I mean, but what sort of interaction do you have with a company that receives a rather large fine and they have, could push them into bankruptcy? What sort of auditing do you do of that so that you have maybe some preemptive measures to engage with that company and help them meet their responsibility financially so that it doesn't move to bankruptcy through the litigation process? Because I know that does happen. And, I think we can be better stewards in terms of the way we assist people meeting their responsibility, doing the cleanup, public safety, but we don't drive them out of business because that's a huge hole. You have to get in line, right, in a bankruptcy court. So give me kind of a little idea of how you deal with companies that might be on that edge.
So,
Excuse me, when you're doing that, could you distinguish between fines, I think, and then cost recovery so that we know what?
yes. Thank you, Senator Bates. I have become more familiar with the challenges of companies in bankruptcy over the last few months than I had previously
I
been.
come from Orange County, mind you, where we had a big one.
And the chairman raises a good point, and that is mostly what we're dealing with here is cost recovery, not fines. So this is their financial responsibility for cleanup work that is being done as a result of contamination they've created. The legal action that's involved spans a number of different types of actions. It is not simply taking someone to court to recover money. Oftentimes, these are complicated sites. There are multiple potentially responsible parties, and we spend time in legal settlement discussions with a number of potentially responsible parties trying to sort out who's responsible for what, who will pay what, and on what schedule. And so there is the opportunity, especially where we have responsible parties who are facing some fiscal challenges of their own, to find payment schedules that they can meet so that they don't go into bankruptcy, because we completely understand that if they go into bankruptcy, then the cost of the cleanup shifts to our orphan share account, which is very much oversubscribed. So we explore a range of opportunities with them to make sure the payments get made. We also are looking to make sure that we aren't going after only one responsible party when there are multiple responsible parties involved. And so there's a lot of legal negotiating involved in that.
Thank you.
Clearly, the state auditor's recommendation, number 7, which would give you more authority to get financial data on the front end of the responsible parties, would clarify the risk. There may be some risk anyway, but at least you'll know what the risk is. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you again, Director Lee. Looking at the differences between the September 2014 and June 15 and your progress therein, there was 142 million unbilled cleanup costs in 14, and there's nothing listed in June. So all of that backlog of unbilling has been attended to?
We have prioritized our sites differently and aren't sorting them in unbilled and uncollected. We're looking at them in a different way, so from dollar amount and statute of limitations. So we can slice and dice and get that number to you, but right now we don't track it in that manner. So I know unbilled is kind of isn't a conceivable notion, because it's like, why don't they just send them a bill? That's how I felt before I came to the department. It's like, let's bring some stamps and send the bill. It's very complicated, though, because it requires a lot of digging into who are the responsible parties. It could be decades-old facilities. So there's a reason sometimes why these people haven't been billed, or we know that they're in bankruptcy, or there's ongoing litigation, and so we don't send a bill. So there are reasons to do that. So we decided it wasn't really helpful for us to look in those terms. If a site comes up and it's not billed, and it needs a bill, then we will do the required investigation so we can invoice them. If we know that they're in litigation, or they're in bankruptcy, or they're likely an orphan site, then we do that documentation. So we've determined that we're sort of slicing it and dicing it a little bit differently, because we thought it was more important to start from the high end of the costs, those with $1 million and above, and those with pending statute of limitations. So if you would like us to, get back to you with exactly how many is in the unbilled and uncollected,
That's fine.
we'd be glad to do that.
It sounds like you're approaching it from a realistic perspective. It would seem that maybe a category is just to write it off.
Yes, and that's lovingly known as the NIFGRA, which is no further cost recovery action. So we have those two. So eventually,
So that 142 didn't disappear, it just became something else.
it could be that we've determined that, but we have to do our due diligence. We have to say, did we document this? Did we go after responsible parties, et cetera, before we can, approve that we're going to write it off?
Sure. Okay. And then you did note that Fiscal had informed you that it would be unable to meet the needs of your billing system. Did they give you reasons why?
Excuse me, what we need to track in our cost recovery system is fairly complicated, and we've developed a number of metrics that go into this tracking. when we had initial conversations with the folks at Fiscal, we were concerned that the matchup was not going to be good, given what we understood about the way the Fiscal system is put together. But we, Fiscal felt that it would be possible to do this, and we set out on a path of trying to explore the types of routines we would need to have created in order to do the kinds of tracking we need to do for these sites and these cost recovery efforts. Ultimately, some of those routines just can't be encompassed in the scope of the platform Fiscal has. And so now we're looking at what's going to be required to create the system that will be able to do the billing and tracking we need done, because the system we currently have is very old and doesn't, you hear about these old state databases that are really held together with almost a prayer, and that's what we have here. So we can't really make any changes to it.
You had mentioned that you intend to find a new platform that can serve your needs in 2017. Between now and then, are you set back at all, or what's going to happen in the meantime?
We are going to do the best that we can to keep the current system operating
That would
and
be
meeting.
Fiscal.
Not Fiscal, our existing cost recovery billing system, CRBS. And this is a system that was created way back when the cleanup program began. So it's decades old. And the platform that it operates on is no longer maintained. So it's a challenge to keep it running.
When you say you're going to find a platform, do you go to the platform store and pick one up? Or is this conceivably a new IT project? Because new IT projects, which I think it probably is a little nervous-making for this body. And we want to make sure that we partner with you and make sure we learn from past mistakes. And do you have any sense of the size and scope and scale of what this new platform would need to be?
We have been working on putting that information together, Senator. It might not surprise you to know that I was cautioned not to say the words IT project.
I'm not surprised. Sorry to ruin your day.
Yes, this will in fact be a new IT project. We are going through
Platform is a much cleaner word, you're right.
Well, it's a happier sounding word. We are going through the procurement process, scoping out the project. A lot of the work was done, the groundwork has been laid because of the discussions we had with the Fiscal staff. So, there are a series of procedures we need to follow in order to get this project out to bid, and we're working with the Caltech folks to do that.
Do you have an idea of when this might go to bid?
I don't want to take a guess at that. I would like to go back and get our most current estimates on that for you.
All right, I know some of my Democratic colleagues and I had the benefit of a presentation by some tech folks at a policy retreat not long ago, and maybe we can, do you remember that? We had a great presentation. I don't remember his name, but the suggestion was that we don't need these legacy operations to sell us the moon and then charge us 3 times for it, but that there's some fast on the ground younger folks who know how to do this and could piece it together. You may be too far into your process for us to be able to offer some suggestions, but that's just an idea, and I will see if I can find who that person was and see if there's any assistance that could be offered.
That would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
And then switching subjects, I just wanted to ask a brief question with regard to just the more comprehensive nature of the cleanups themselves. What's the nature of the community involvement or process? Because so often, as we saw many of these situations devolve, and I'm thinking Exide among others, that we heard some really heartbreaking stories from community members who have been so devastated by the impact of the irresponsibility of some of these companies. how do you hear from those impacted that what you're doing is on target?
There are a couple of ways that we do that. On a site-specific basis, we do community outreach when we're in the site discovery process, when we're gathering information about the contamination, and we let people know that we're doing that and that there will be a cleanup at the site. There are required milestones for public participation in the decision-making about the site. Our efforts typically go above and beyond that by a fairly good margin. We hold a lot of in-community meetings. We also, as a department, although we don't have a policy board, we hold quarterly public meetings where we advise the community and anyone interested about what we're working on, and we allow them to give us input into that. And our last community meeting was held a month ago, and it was specifically focused on cleanup sites. So that's one way in which we do it. We have newsletters. We have quite a lot of information on our website. We have a database called EnviroStore, where people can access our information and can go into the database on a site-by-site basis and look at everything we're doing in regards to a site, all the documents that are available, see the timeframes involved. There are a number of other mechanisms as well. Maybe it would be helpful if we could provide you with a summary of that.
I would appreciate that, and I am pleased to hear what you're telling us and would only encourage you to further invest to the degree that you can, because that's what this is all about, right? Not only protecting lives, but also giving those communities a sense that, number one, we care, that we more than care, we're concerned, we're engaged, and that we're there to address the problems that have been created. And perception is probably half the battle. So if you've got a community that really hears from you and understands your sincere intent, that'll take you a long distance.
I appreciate that. I've actually spent a lot of time in the last 6 months traveling around the state to communities, including weekend bus tours and a number of other mechanisms to meet with the people living in the communities affected by the sites that we regulate. We also are expecting our newly appointed Assistant Director for Environmental Justice to start work in a couple of weeks on the 30th.
Is this a new person or a new office?
Both. It's a new office and it's a new
Terrific.
person.
Terrific.
So she will be starting, and her name is Ana Mascareñas. She is just last week graduated from UCLA with her master's in public health, has an extensive background in community engagement and environmental justice work. She lives in the Boyle Heights neighborhood near Exide, and we're really looking forward to having her come on board.
Sounds like a good fit.
And we also have a public participation modernization effort underway, working under contract with UC Davis, and they're doing surveys of communities and others around the state to get a better understanding of the needs of communities in terms of access to information and input into our process so that we can enhance what we're doing and better meet their needs.
All good news. Thank you. Continued success.
Well, thank you, Director Lee and Ms. Hardy, for your testimony this morning. Now I'd like to invite representatives from the State of California's Auditor's Office to make a presentation. Welcome. Yeah, it should be.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for inviting our office to discuss the audit and update you on the department's efforts to implement the recommendations from the audit. My name is Tammy Lozano. I was the audit principal for this audit, and with me I have Aaron Fellner, who was the team leader, which is our audit supervisor. The Joint Legislative Audit Committee approved a request asking us to look at the department's processes and whether they had an effective process for recovering the costs, as the director mentioned. In our audit, she kind of already described, we had updated the outstanding costs at $194 million and more than 16 projects, and that was as of March 2014. In our report, in our report of the department's cost recovery processes, we noted that the department is unlikely to recover millions of dollars in outstanding costs due to several factors, including the statute of limitations has probably already expired on a number of projects totaling $13.4 million. The department cannot verify the billing status in many of the projects due to poor documentation. Some of the outstanding costs may have been overstated in the billing system because they were never adjusted when they received settlement payments under settlement agreements. And there are also outstanding costs totaling $73 million related to projects that were affected by bankruptcy or are in ongoing litigation. And the department doesn't know how much it will collect until those legal processes have concluded. We made several recommendations to the department. As the director mentioned, there were 9 to the department, to the legislature, to improve the department's efforts in collecting outstanding costs and to improve the data in its billing system. We have a follow-up process, as she also mentioned, at 60 days, 6 months, and 1 year. The 1-year response is due actually in August. And Aaron's gonna talk about a few of the recommendations and the status as of the 6-month response, which they provided in February.
Hello. Yeah, since DTSC has already briefed you on the 6 fully implemented recommendations, I'll just be taking you through the 3 partially implemented and the 2 legislative recommendations. The first of which concerns the recovery tools used by DTSC to recover costs. We found that DTSC was not consistently using liens against responsible parties as real property. When we asked, they indicated that their procedures were unclear at the time. We made a recommendation that they update those procedures. This recommendation is only partially implemented because although DTSC has provided us with some revised procedures for that, as of February 2015, and as the director indicated earlier, there's a Court of Appeals opinion that does cast some concerns about that process. So DTSC is still evaluating that. It's still partially implemented.
Is the problem with, tell me about the Court of Appeals. Is it they don't have the authority to put the lien on?
According to DTSC's 6-month response, it seems to have to do with what their lien hearing procedures may not comply with constitutional due process principles. If you want more information than that, you'll have to talk to them. Hopefully in their August response, they will provide some additional information about that evaluation that they're doing. So. Moving on to the next, we've talked a little bit about Fiscal so far, and our concern isn't so much what new system DTSC decides to use, is that all of the data that they have is clean when they put it in the new system. So the department has indicated that the outstanding costs will all be resolved as of July 2016. So if that date holds, that's great, but they should not put any of that data that's currently still being evaluated into their new procurement until the time it's cleaned up. So that's remained partial. And finally, concerning the amounts under $5,000, DTSC has made some efforts over the past 10 months. They have issued guidance to staff about discharging or writing off projects with amounts between $25 and $500, and those projects are already closed. Now, they did an analysis back before the audit was released that showed that depending on the complexity of the project, it would take between $1,000 and $8,000 to, recover some costs. So it could cost way more than the $5,000. Could cost up to about $8,800, or it could cost very little to collect that money. So, our recommendation was, well, write off what you can, but to the extent you can collect, do so. And we hope that they do initiate that analysis. Regarding the 2 legislative recommendations, the first was concerning the interest payments, the interest rate charged on late payments. Currently, state law requires that the department use the state surplus money investment fund rate for late payments. That's called the SMIF rate for short. It's low. We found in the report, we just took 1 quarter. In June 30th, 2013, the SMIF rate was 0.246%, so 1/4 of 1%. Meanwhile, the BOE, the Board of Equalization, over the same period was using a 6% rate. And I think we found that, just on one late invoice, the DTSC had to charge $654 on, a $100,000 invoice versus $10,000 that a higher rate would have been able to achieve. So that spawned our first legislative recommendation, which was to give that the legislature should revise state law to allow the department to use a higher rate. Finally, we also found that the department was also limited in its ability to recover costs effectively because it couldn't require financial information from potentially responsible parties. It could only request that information and then would have to sue them for it later. And basically, it didn't allow them to weed out who wasn't financially viable and who was. And you kind of need that as quick as possible if you want to start these recovery efforts early. So that takes us through the partially implemented recommendations and the current department status on their implementation, and we're happy to take any questions.
Members have questions? Go ahead. Mr. Leno.
Thank you. Just to follow up on the necessity for the new platform, do you have any thoughts or suggestions, recommendations for the department as to how they should proceed, or are there any markers that we should be looking at as they prepare to put this to bed?
No, our primary concern was that in the past, before they implemented CRBS, their old billing system, they had moved bad data from their legacy system from the 90s into CRBS, thus kind of continuing the garbage in, garbage out cycle. So we thought, well, before they try to do this again with Fiscal, let's make sure that they clean up all of the data. That was really more the focus than whatever platform or IT procurement they decided to use.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You referenced the interest charge, and certainly with a low interest rate, there's no incentive for someone to pay that fine because they could perhaps get a better investment elsewhere with those funds. So you mentioned legislatively we have to make that change, and would that similarly be applied to requesting financial data from those debtors and having that legislatively changed as well? And we should look into that, I think. If
That's correct, yes.
both of those would require legislation.
Mm-hmm. Alejo over there.
That's what coming up.
Yeah, it's coming up.
I like it. Thank you.
Beautifully. Could I just,
Yes.
there's such a common thread going through so much of this with oversight and the inability to collect funds and the sort of the fact that our systems are old and kind of not integrated and not updated. As the LAO's office, do you have any suggestions for us, not only with this agency, which I do want to thank you for trying to, sometimes it's like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. We have old systems, we have sort of a mindset that is, let's leave things as they are, while we're pushing to try to make things better. And yet the technology, it just doesn't fit. Whether it's because, as Senator Leno pointed out, we have a system in place that almost requires us to deal with these huge companies that move at the speed of, maple syrup in winter. And it's distressing. This is kind of like a little deja vu all over again, as has been pointed out by some who are more articulate than I. I just wonder, do you have any thoughts on, based upon not only your analysis, but your recommendations? How do we break this cycle, both, in this agency, but also in others where we really need to develop those 21st century technologies. They're out there, the platforms, the software, whatever you want to call it, it's there. But we don't seem to be able to catch that wave and go with it. We just find ourselves spending enormous amounts of money, getting nowhere, and further embarrassing the agency and, frankly, the state by a level of incompetence that just seems to continue.
Oh, I wish there was an easy answer for you. We've been monitoring the implementation of Fiscal for years and issuing, quarterly reports on that. And, that implementation continues to come apace, but there's not a quick fix. Even oversight sometimes doesn't even seem to quite push things along as we'd like.
Well, I know that Secretary Maribel Badger is working on this, and she's with the General Services, I think, and it just, I can't believe that we can't crack this nut. And to hear you say that there's no simple answer just leaves me kind of empty with enthusiasm here. I mean, has your shop tried to do anything on this? Where do we go to get? It's just incredible to me. This is not a problem just with this agency, but so many others. How do we fix this problem? I mean, we're chasing our tails here.
And again, I think our oversight that we've been exercising over Fiscal has helped to keep everyone informed about where the project is. And I think that's probably the best you're going to get is that level of transparency that you need before you've spent billions and billions of dollars, as the case management system for AOC is kind of the perfect example of that I was also on the audit of. So.
They need to be updated. I mean, what happens is they mess up and we dump the system and we chide them and we throw up our hands and say we can't spend any more money on this. Meanwhile, they have no system because the old one didn't work, and they're slogging along, not advancing. I mean, we have to get rid of the old, but that doesn't mean, well, we're not gonna try to upgrade it. The goal in the first place was to get them into the 21st century. These are agencies that are large, and this, because the state is large. When you're talking about 38, 40 million people, that requires levels of efficiency that I know this governor has been, stomping on the table for. And yet what we do is we end up with systems that don't work, and then we just, what are we doing, for example, with the AOC? Is there a new system that's been proposed? No. So I mean, obviously, we have got to figure out, I think this is one of our biggest challenges, is to find a way that we can run the state more efficiently using the technologies that are developed here. The companies are here. The small, the lighter, more flexible, younger, not necessarily age-wise, but, people who see the future without all that baggage of a big corporation with huge payrolls, they can do this work. I would like to see the LAO as part of its function, rather than come here and tell us it's not a simple answer, to help us find the answer and to work with the Department of General Services, to work with these various agencies and come up with something. This has been a problem for decades, and I am beginning to lose patience, and I think we all are. We need to make this whole process run more efficiently, enforce the laws that we've got to protect the public, and also work with these businesses. I mean, I think that directive is clear. Now, let's just make it happen. I would like, Mr. Chair, to ask these folks to come back again at some time in the not-too-distant future with some answers, with some proposals.
Well, evidently in August, we're going to have another report.
There you go.
So
Well,
that's a date. Yeah, I mean, I expect this is a big problem. I think you highlighted, we have some recommendations that are partially implemented. I mean, I have some questions, I guess, on some of the recommendations. I think you heard my comment on the $5,000 write-off. I mean, I think that they've implemented a program with the itty-bitty, this under $500, and again, it's bad data, don't put it into the next system. And then they can consult with the Department of Finance, which is this legislative body's favorite department nowadays, is the Department of Finance. But it's the lack of authority. I mean, it seems to me that the recommendation is that if it's more than $5,000, you should pursue that. And I don't know if they have the authority as we would in a business. You say we've got all this bad debt or all this uncollectible debt, all this old debt, and maybe the statute of limitations hasn't exactly run, but it's not worth our time to do this. We're a public health. We're worried about contamination cleanup, and sometimes it's just better to eat that cost, right? And again, you came in with a recommendation at the 5,000 level, and we have legislation. I know you're not going to comment on legislation, but I'm trying to figure out I'm trying to give the tools to the agency that will say, okay, good, bad. Again, some people you should pursue $1,000, and it won't be that hard. So, can you give me your thought on that hard line?
Well, it's really more of a guide because we understood that depending on the complexity of the case, it could be very easy to resolve the outstanding cost. But that in certain instances, it just did not seem worth the effort of the department for complex cases, especially involving very small responsible parties when you had several large ones already out there, and that we did identify such a large bulk of projects that would take a lot of time and effort for DTSC to go through, when really it would only resolved around $1.2 million worth of outstanding costs. So that analysis hinged on what's the cost benefit for them. And to the extent that they do want to review some of these projects to see, okay, for the easy ones, let's clear those out and send out that bill so we can make sure that's resolved. But in other cases, is this just too much work based on the analysis that they'd already performed for their workflow to say that clearly way more work than necessary. So I think that's why we came up with that $5,000 line there, was because we could see, okay, here's this huge bulk, and it's really a small amount of money.
Yeah, no, it's a third. It's a third of the sites. All right, now we're going to open up. Thank you for your testimony. Sure. Now I'm going to ask members of the public if they'd like to make comments just on this oversight hearing. And we're going to get in a moment here, we're going to get into the legislative response. But if there's members who'd like to comment on the testimony that they heard today, not on pending legislation, but on the testimony they heard today, I'd like to invite them up. Seeing none, I'm going to conclude our oversight hearing with the Department of Toxic Substance Control, and that oversight hearing is adjourned. Now I'd like to open up our regular hearing. In first order of business assistance, I'm going to convene the legislative hearings for the special session or special order of business, which is Assembly Bills 273 through Assembly Bill 276. Assistant Mr. Alejo, I see, is here, the chair of the committee. Please call the roll to establish a quorum.
Members Wachowski.
Aye. Are here.
Wachowski here. Gaines. Bates. Bates here. Hill. Hill here. Jackson. Jackson here. Leno. Leno here. Pavley. Pavley here.
We have a quorum. Senator Hill, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? So move. Please call the roll. This is item number 6.
Item 6, AB 323 by Assemblymember Olson. The motion is due pass with consent recommendation. Senators Wachowski.
Aye.
Wachowski, aye. Gaines. Bates. Aye. Bates, aye. Hill. Aye. Hill, aye. Jackson. Aye. Jackson, aye. Leno. Aye. Leno, aye. Pavley. Pavley, aye. 16.
All right, that matters, or we'll keep the roll open for those absent members. They can come in. Assemblymember Alejo, welcome to the Senate Committee on Environmental Quality, and I'd like to commend your committee and your committee staff for the quinella of legislation that we have to address the issues or some of the issues that we heard today on the Department of Toxic Substance. And please begin with the first bill, 273.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members, and thank you for setting me up very nicely with the update on the DTSC audit that we requested last year, and certainly share many of the sentiments and concerns that were just expressed a few minutes ago by members of this committee. So we're doing the follow-up now, making sure that we don't want an audit to be done and sit on a shelf and collect dust. We'd like to put that good information to good use. And so I think in total, we have 5 bills trying to address some of the recommendations from the audit. But 4 of them are before this committee for this hearing. So I'll start with AB 273 by the ESTM committee, which will increase the interest rate charged on bill but unpaid invoices owed to DTSC to improve the timeliness of the collections from responsible parties. The current interest rate is so low, as you all pointed earlier, that the auditor believes that there's little incentive for responsible parties to make payments on time. The auditor recommended that in order to improve the DTSC's efforts to promptly recover its costs, the legislature should revise state law to allow DTSC to use a higher interest rate assessed on late payments. The bill would require a monetary obligation owed to DTSC to accrue a flat 10% interest or 7% interest for local governments. I respectfully ask for an aye vote on this bill.
We have support. Anybody here in favor of AB 273? Please come forward.
Bill Alio for the Environmental Working Group in support. Thank you.
Eddie Moreno on behalf of Sierra Club California in support.
Andrea Ventura with Clean Water Action in support.
Thank you very much. Opposition to AB 273? No opposition. All right, let's close the public hearing. Questions of the author by members of the committee? Seems pretty straightforward. We're not in the business of second guessing your committee's calculations and bill on what would be appropriate interest rate level at here. So there's a motion by Senator Hill. Please call the roll.
Item 1, AB 273 by Committee on ESTM. The motion is due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines? Bates? Hill?
Aye.
Hill, aye. Jackson? Aye. Jackson, aye. Leno?
Aye.
Leno, aye. Pavley? Aye. Pavley, aye. 5-0.
We'll keep that matter on call for the absent members. Let's go to item number 2, AB 274.
Thank you, members, for supporting the previous bill. AB 274 now will clarify that DTSC can prioritize its cost recovery efforts by allowing bills accrued during a finite period of time to lapse and write off those costs as uncollectible. DTSC's cost to do due diligence and identify a responsible party for those projects often cost more than $7,800, resulting in a financial loss to the department to pursue. Authorizing DTSC to cut its losses on low-dollar uncollected projects valued at less than $5,000 accrued during the finite time will enable DTSC to more expeditiously cut through the backlog of outstanding costs and free up resources to just larger, higher priority cleanup costs. This bill has no opposition. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Very good. Members, anybody here in support of AB 274? Please come forward.
Bill Alio for the Environmental Working Group in support. Thank you.
Eddie Moreno with Sierra Club California in support.
May I inquire, Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
I didn't hear anything, amendments?
No, I was going to get to that.
Oh, okay, very good, thank you.
There's
Thought I might have
in
missed
the
it.
analysis.
Yes.
But let's go to opposition to AB 276 and then bring it back to committee. This is on page 2 of 3 at the bottom. Seeing no opposition to AB 274, on the comments by the committee, we have a one-time fix amendment. As noted above, this legislation applies to outstanding bills and costs accrued prior to December 31st, 2013. They're pursuing a new audit, and I guess the suggestion is have a sunset on the legislation just so that when we get to 2020, they may not have fixed the problem, I guess, is the question.
We'll accept that as an author's amendment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Okay, so now we have to pick a date.
Yes.
And it might be valuable to ask the director when they think that when they'd be able to clear the books of the 5,000 or less of those cases.
Director Lee, can I ask you to come up here on AB 274? I guess the inquiry with the chairman of ESTM's indulgence, when do we think that the backlog of these small claims would be completed? You've done quite a good job now with the itty-bitty little ones.
I don't have that in front of me, but if you want to hold this for a moment, I can see if I can get that for you in the next couple of minutes.
Now, the recommendation is this goes to the floor, right? Or is this,
So it'll go to appropriation.
okay, so appropriations.
So they could take it in appropriation.
Let's hear from Ms. Hardy, the money person.
I think that we believe that it could take another year if we have the current resources to go through, because it would be an additional 564 sites, 65.
Okay, so if the computer system is in July 2016, let's just say it's late, but let's just say this is in 2017, the system, everything should get through, so January 1, 2019, does that seem to be enough time to, we'll have oversight, but everything should be cleared out? Is that
Yes.
It's acceptable to me, Mr. Chair.
okay?
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I could, I think that's an appropriate amount of time. And with the new system, and certainly with the ability to gather greater financial information on those responsible parties, it may be easier to get that 5,000 or less in the future. So I think that we're giving them a great deal of authority that could improve that situation tremendously. So I think that's a good time frame.
And it probably goes without saying, but if that does not hold up, please let us know. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other comments by members of the committee?
Just to
Okay.
clarify, this merely authorizes.
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chair.
Just wanted to make that
We'll still
clear.
have the ability to pursue it if they want to do that, yeah.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Senator Leno, was that a motion to approve? Okay. Please call the roll.
Item 2AB 274 by Committee on ESTM. The motion is due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines? Bates? Bates, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Jackson? Jackson, aye. Leno? Leno, aye. Pavley?
We'll keep that matters approved, but we'll keep it open. Let's move to item number 3. This is AB 275.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill will revise the state's, does two things. First revises the state statute of limitations to match the federal statute of limitations to give the state more time to recover cleanup cost. And second, it removes a reference to DTSC's general fund to prevent taxpayer dollars from unnecessarily subsidizing toxic waste cleanup. A bedrock principle of environmental law and regulations is that pollution costs should be borne by its creators, but under current state law, there's a specific liability for taxpayer dollars to partially fund cleanup due to the provision that requires the state's toxics account to pay off any judgment in excess of what a responsible party can afford to pay. That means taxpayer dollars are covering the cost of a cleanup where the responsible parties, the polluters, should be paying. AB 275 removes the reference to the state account so that the state is not liable for footing the bill when polluters should be paying the cleanup. This bill will provide DTSC more flexibility to pursue cost recovery cases in state court without putting taxpayer dollars on the line to cover cleanup costs. I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
And just so members are alerted, there was an amendment to our staff report that came in of what the bill would do, and it's added at the top of page 2 that we delete within 6 years of the initiation of a removal or remedial process action to just clearly state it requires that if an operation and maintenance is required as part of the corrective action, that the cost recovery action shall be commenced by the department within 3 years of the certification of that operation and maintenance. So we're all clear. Members or Anybody in support of AB 275 that'd like to be heard?
Phil Alio, Environmental Working Group, in support.
Eddie Moreno on behalf of Sierra Club California in support.
Andrea Ventura with Clean Water Action in support.
Okay. Others, those opposed to AB 275? Seeing none, Senator Jackson.
Yes, just a couple thoughts. One is that I understand the need to make the statute of limitations equal. I always hesitate to defer to the federal laws when they are weaker than the state laws, but in this case, I understand, and I'm going to support that. Just as a caveat, I don't think we should, to me, that's kind of going backwards and forwards, but in this case, I understand the importance of that. My other question is that if we're going to take away the taxpayer's responsibility for cleaning up a toxic waste site, and I know you have a few in your district and I have a few in mine, what do we do in the instance where the polluter doesn't pay? Instances where they declare bankruptcy and they leave town. Who's going to be on the hook for that? And in the case I'm thinking of in my district, it's the people of the local community who are now stuck with the costs of this cleanup. So I'm just wondering how we're going to address that problem if we take away the taxpayer. And I certainly understand, but, you know, are we going to, there are some of these bad actors who find ways to avoid their responsibility, including you know, bankrupting their responsibility.
Mr. Alejo, if you'd like to address that, I'd like to have Director Lee come up also.
Right, maybe DTSC could help us answer that, but certainly in these cases that do actually get litigated and go to court, certainly it's the courts are able to apportion liability based on the responsible parties, but we also, the state does also continue to have its orphan account that's also helped to assist in those types of situations.
And we also know that the orphan account is going to get a new friend with the federal Superfund account that is, well, I'll let the director and her staff testify.
Mr. Chairman, committee, I appreciate the opportunity. I have with me Amelia Glickman. She's counsel with counsel in at DTSC, and she is prepared to respond to the questions.
Push the button, right?
All right, thank you very much. Good morning. This legislation, it wouldn't necessarily preclude the department from using orphan funds to clean up a site, but what typically happens in a cost recovery action that's filed after a site gets cleaned up, for instance, in federal court, if we actually sue the responsible parties, the court actually has the power to apportion those costs among responsible parties. So if there are orphan shares due to somebody not having the ability to pay those costs, or for instance, they filed bankruptcy, the court could actually, using equitable factors, apportion that percentage-wise among the people who are actually still kind of standing in that litigation. And that's something, and the state law kind of follows that and actually statutorily embodies that allocation and apportionment principle and allows potentially for the possibility of actually having those orphan shares allocated to other responsible parties in accordance with percentages determined by a court.
What happens if the court, the federal court, has sliced up the pie, so to speak, and then the person files bankruptcy, or it's a subsequent action? They're responsible for this, but the action comes later. Are you able to go back and reapportion it, or is that a cost that's going to be absorbed by the state typically?
That's a great question, and I think that would be potentially fact-specific. If a party did later file for bankruptcy, of course, you know, the department would have the ability to file a claim in the bankruptcy proceeding, often resulting really kind of in pennies on the dollar in terms of our recovery. In order to see about maybe reapportioning those costs, of course, we would probably have to go back to the court to file some sort of motion for that. The likelihood of disturbing already finalized settlements and things like that is probably pretty slim. So there is the possibility that orphan funds would have to be utilized in those circumstances if there was cleanup that remained to be conducted.
And while we have you here, you know, the staff report indicates that there's about $9.2 million in or allocated roughly for orphan funds. and we think that the Superfund may be equal to that. It may be larger.
I can't speak in a great detail about that, but I understand that there will be a point in time coming up shortly where our federal obligations are going to exceed the amount in our state orphan fund. DTSC is required to do a 10% match for remedies on contaminated sites and eventually take over 100% of the operation and maintenance. And of course, these Superfund sites, they tend to be incredibly large and costly.
Mr. Chairman, I would be happy to provide the committee with more information about this. It is, as you are aware, a significant issue that's facing us in the coming years. There are a number of Superfund sites where we have provided our 10% share for the construction of the remedy. When EPA selects the remedy that will be constructed at these sites, their fiduciary responsibility is to ensure that the federal Superfund pays for cleanup at as many sites as possible. So they have an incentive to select remedies that cost less to build up front. Frequently, those remedies cost more to operate over time. And when the obligation for paying for the remedy shifts from EPA to the states at the point when the construction is complete and the operation and maintenance period begins, that's when the large costs come to us. When you look at the history of the federal Superfund program, we're now getting into the time period where those remedies have been selected and built, and they're now transitioning into operation and maintenance. So those costs are coming to us. The costs are in the tens of millions of dollars in the coming years, and we expect that they will grow, and they also, in some cases, will continue on, not just for a few years, but for many, many years, and in a couple of cases, in perpetuity, because these remedies have to be operated indefinitely in order to maintain the protection for the public.
That will be tomorrow's problem. Well, it's coming. We have AB 275 for today's problem. I don't see any other questions. Thank you. I keep forgetting this. Would you like to close? I mean,
Enough good comments to close on my bill, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. No close.
Okay. There's a motion by Senator Leno. Please call the roll.
Item 3, AB 275 by Committee on ESTM. The motion is due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wajkowski.
Aye.
Wajkowski, aye. Gaines. Bates. Aye. Bates, aye. Hill. Aye. Hill, aye. Jackson. Aye. Jackson, aye. Leno. Aye. Leno, aye. Pavley. Pavley, aye. 6-0.
All right. We'll keep that open for our absent members. Let's go to your final bill, 276.
Yeah, last bill, members, it's AB 276, which will grant new authority to DTSC that matches existing authority. The U.S. EPA has to request financial information from parties potentially responsible for toxic waste cleanup. Under existing state law, DTSC can ask for information related to hazardous materials and waste, but it cannot request information about a party's finances, which could demonstrate the party's ability to pay cleanup costs. Having authority to ask for financial information will allow DTSC to identify those parties genuinely who lack the ability to pay for cleanup and obviate the need for DTSC to first sue to obtain the financial information. Aligning state law with federal law will help expedite the cost recovery process and save the state costs otherwise being expended on unnecessary litigation. This bill has no opposition and respectfully ask for an aye vote.
This would certainly seem like aligning federal or state law with federal law is a step in the right direction. So it's
like the last one.
it's a good thing. Members in support of AB 276.
Bill Alio with Environmental Working Group in support. Also, I'm here to represent California Legal Conservation voters on this bill and the prior three, also in support. One quick word was we thank the committee of ESTM for bringing these bills forward and the chair, Mr. Alejo, and also the chair and the committee for holding oversight hearing this morning. This agency doesn't have the high profile of a CARB or a Coastal Commission or now DOGGR, we all know that, but it's a very important agency to the state of California and the members of the public, and we're glad to see the attention that the legislature is giving it. And we hope that the new director is able to, through new management and the initiative she's talked about, clean it up and really make it a better agency. Thank you.
None taken, yes.
Eddie Moreno on behalf of Sierra Club California in support.
Good morning, Victoria Rome with Natural Resources Defense Council in support and in support of the previous bills as well. Thank you.
And Andrea Ventura with Clean Water Action in support.
Thank you. Opposition to AB 276. Seeing none, let's bring it back to the committee. Questions of the author? There's a motion by Senator Pavley. You may close. Okay.
Respectfully, I ask for your support, and thank you for all the support on all the previous bills. Thank you.
Oh.
The Assembly Committee for bringing all these forward.
Thank you, Senator.
Okay, let's call the roll.
Item 4, AB 276 by Committee on ESTM. The motion is due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wykowski.
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines. Bates.
Aye.
Bates, aye. Hill.
Aye.
Hill, aye. Jackson.
Aye.
Jackson, aye. Leno.
Aye.
Leno, aye. Pavley.
Aye.
Pavley, aye.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go get a cup of tea. We're going to wait for a member of the Assembly who'd like to have their bill heard. And once again, like to thank the committee and Chairman Alejo and the department for being here for our oversight hearing. We're waiting for a member. Okay, we'll reconvene the Senate Environmental Quality Committees. Assemblymember Perea, good morning. Welcome to the other side.
I've seen 2 Perea bills already today. And this is the third one.
So this is item
You
number...
liked
both of them.
I did, and so I finished.
Oh, no. This is item number 5, cost, AB 21.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. AB 21 is a measure that would direct the California Air Resources Board when developing its scoping plan to include matters related to energy efficiency and electrification of the transportation sector in addition to what is already required under current law. In addition, this bill would state the intent of the legislature is that the ARB design emission reduction measures to clean the environment in ways that are cost-effective for California residents. In order to meet existing statewide goals such as doubling efficiency in existing buildings and deploying 1.5 million electric vehicles on California roads by 2025, these additional elements to the scoping plan need to be included and thoroughly assessed to ensure we understand the remaining challenges to meet these goals. The advanced deployment of electric vehicles and significant increases in building efficiency requires a coordinated approach between state agencies and the legislature, and the scoping plan has proven to be a useful tool to guide sound policy decisions. AB 21 will ensure we continue our leadership on climate change and keep us on the path to success achieving long-term goals. Respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Okay, well, thank you. It's certainly, legislation has been skinnied up since its original intent. Let's hear support for AB 21.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Michael Shaw with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. We agree with your statement. Things have been skinnied up a little bit, but I think the important statement that AB 21 makes is that in order for California to truly be a global leader on the fight against climate change on a global scale, we need to make sure that our policies make sense and that they're functional and working together. AB 21 really lays the groundwork for that. It helps ensure that the economic impacts are properly considered, that we're looking at coordination amongst the electrification of the transportation sector and other implications that follow through from our climate change policy, both in AB 32, in addition to what comes next in post-2020, as we consider those very issues in this legislature as well. So CMTA supports AB 21 and the effort to help coordinate and bring those things together, and we ask for your aye vote on AB 21.
Other support for AB 21 by Assemblymember Pereira, please come forward.
Morning, Amy Mago on behalf of the California Chamber of Commerce and support.
All right, let's turn to opposition. Opposition to AB 21? Seeing none, let's bring it back to the committee. Members? Senator Leno.
Assemblyman, welcome. I think, as Mr. Shaw pointed out, to have some coordination and bringing voices together is all well and good. Nothing to criticize or consider otherwise. But could you share with us, as the bill's going forward, what is that the full intent of the bill, or is there something else you really want to get at? Because,
Sure.
as was mentioned, it's been modified since first introduction, and so it could look almost like a substantive spot bill at this point. And just wondering, what's the real intent here?
And the supporters are all people that don't like AB 32, so I just,
Sure.
that's a legitimate question.
Well, and let me provide a response. Look, I get that my position and others like me that are more moderate in the Democratic Party are not always in alignment with others within the caucus. And I get that based on the district that I represent and that others like me represent, we provide a unique and a different perspective that sometimes is heard and sometimes isn't. So I appreciate the question because I know that over the past few years, I've taken positions that have not always gelled with other members within the party. Having said that, when we look at this particular issue, what we're trying to get at is to begin, even if it's at a very small way, to address issues like cost effectiveness and to have our agencies at least take a more thorough look as to what do these policies mean, how do they impact real people, and how does it impact, for example, somebody who lives in a wealthier community versus someone who lives in a community like mine. Senator Pavley, you mentioned that you heard two of my bills in a previous committee, and I've just take it back to just a little bit to an hour or so ago, in that I was presenting a bill for a community that is 4,100 people, all farm workers. I mean, these are individuals who make about $17,000 a year. And so as we talk about these broad subject matters and talk about some of these aspirational large goals, I think it's important that we ensure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. And if they are participating, what does that mean in terms of cost? What does that mean for a community like the example I gave, the city of San Joaquin? 4,100 people is completely isolated from everybody else in Fresno County. I mean, they don't have a lot of city services. They don't have county offices. There are no state offices or federal help. They're on their own. So AB 21, as the chairman correctly described, has been skinnied up. Certainly we wanted to do a little bit more at the time, but it still sort of keeps the very basic tenet, and that is, can we have a more thorough conversation about the cost, what do these things cost? What do these policies cost? And is there a more cost-effective way for us to achieve these aspirational goals that we set as a state.
Fair enough. And I just want to assure you, Assemblyman, I would have asked that question no matter who the author was.
I don't.
Truly, truly. So what we're looking at today is what you're looking at in moving forward
Yes.
to the governor's desk.
Yes.
Great to know. Thank you. And I move the bill.
There's a motion. Senator Jackson.
Yes, I noted that I'm a little confused as to where the bill stands at the moment. There is a letter from Carter, Wetch and Associates, who tend to represent some of the,
I think it's been withdrawn.
They opposed the previous version.
But, and what confused me is that the letter's dated June 12th.
It's withdrawn. It's
been withdrawn.
Yeah, it's been withdrawn.
Didn't get that memo, but I did get the dress memo earlier for wearing scarves today. So, okay, well, I appreciate that. It clarifies.
Sure.
I was trying to figure out what the bill did now that was an issue.
That was I should have probably said something at the beginning.
No, I
'cause it
appreciate
was
that.
confusing.
And, I just want to say, and I agree that we have to consider all aspects of issues as we go forward. I kind of feel, though, that given the nature of this House and all, that the economic impacts are always heard. Some of our colleagues in the third House make sure that we are well aware of their concerns, and I appreciate that in legislation. I just, you made a comment about how these things impact real people, and I think we all represent real people. So I just wanted to assure you that, that the concerns that you experience on behalf of your constituents are factored in as we consider our constituents who are also real people. So I am going to support the bill in its current form, but just want to assure you, there are many of us who do think that this is one state. And granted, the challenges in different parts of the state are different, but I think that, we all share that common goal.
Sure.
So I appreciate your bringing this bill at this point, but also hope to assure you that the economic considerations are indeed, or should always be part of the discussion. So thank you.
You have a motion. We have another question by Ms. Senator Pavley.
Just a question. I know the word cost effectives in AB 32 in multiple places, and the car bill in multiple places. In fact, the Clean Car Law, which is a concern in the Central Valley because the co-benefits of reducing criteria air pollutants, and I'm very sensitive to the asthma rates for San Joaquin and everyone else in the valley. So, what is your definition of cost effective?
Well, when I think about cost effectiveness, I think that, and to another point that Senator Jackson made, and that yes, we are one state, but we all have different regional needs. It's almost like when we talked about when we had the water debate last year on the water bond. That was very much a bill driven by regional needs. And so when I think about the future in climate change and addressing issues like alternative energy, renewable energy, or alternative fuels, the question I think one question we have to consider is, what does it mean for different regions? And every region has a different need, and every region can absorb costs differently. And so I think if we can take a look at that and understand that the economy, for example, of the Central Valley can be very different from the economy of other parts of the state, and what might work for us may not work for somebody else. So when I think about the term cost effectiveness, I think about our state agencies doing a thorough analysis of looking to meet the broader objectives in a way that allows for each region to continue to compete, to allow for their constituents and their residents, essentially to afford the policies that are taking place. I'll give you an example. I think, and we've had many conversations on this, I think a real natural fit for the Central Valley is the use of natural gas. I think that is something that, while certainly is not the, is not an EV, is not, is not that technology, is certainly good and solid technology that could help reduce emissions in a place like the Central Valley, where you have major trade goods corridors down the I-5 and the 99, which have a huge impact on the air quality of our region. So when I think of cost effectiveness, I think that there are opportunities for us to look at needs based on our regions and what we can afford and what makes sense for our economy, so that everybody can participate in a cleaner economy.
And the operative word is the cleaner economy and the balance on the cost effective, because that's a healthier economy. Because if it's only about the cost, there's also a cost of not doing anything. But what if coal was 10 times cheaper than natural gas? You wouldn't want that as a trade-off.
Well, I said on the
Central Valley. But
I said on
if
the
cost is the factor, why not? Does that trump?
Sure.
So it is a balancing act.
Oh, absolutely it is.
Sometimes upfront short-term costs save money down the road for these same people that we all care about. And so you have to be careful on just defining cost effectiveness. There's a cost, healthcare costs, there's a lot of costs if
Sure.
we don't do things right, and we have to make sure they're implemented. Your bill really doesn't talk about, or that I've read, the separate geographic areas, but I'm
Right.
sensitive to that. But I get in this debate with people that cost just means upfront dollar cost today
Long-term.
with no balancing on the real costs to society, long-term and short-term, so.
Okay, anything you'd like to add to?
No, just I'll close by just concurring with Senator Pavley in that I sat on the Air Board, San Joaquin Valley Air Board, for 4 years, so certainly understand the health needs that are occurring where I'm raising my kids. Certainly want my kids to breathe cleaner air than I have in my generation. At the same time, I want to make sure that we preserve and enhance economic opportunities for them as well. And I think that there's an opportunity here for us to have a win-win in both addressing issues like GHG reduction, but also doing it in a way that allows for job growth, that allows for all regions within our respective districts to prosper. And so AB 21, I think, is a very modest proposal that certainly allows us to at least have a little bit more of a thorough analysis about what cost effectiveness is, what does it mean, and what does it look like regionally. And so I would just respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Very good. And just, this committee has conducted 2 oversight hearings on climate adaptation. We're planning a 3rd and a 4th, and one of them will be out in the Central Valley to look at those effects on climate change, particularly with in your area. So
would love to host you.
Yeah, there is a motion. Please call the roll. Yeah.
Item 5, AB 21 by Assemblymember Perea. The motion is due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines? Bates? Bates, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Jackson? Jackson, aye. Leno? Leno, aye. Pavley? Pavley, aye.
That matters approved. We'll keep the roll open for final vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Next up is going to be Assemblymember Garcia with item number 7, AB 434. I forgot to announce that item 8, AB 450 with Assemblymember McCarthy has been pulled at the author's request, so we'll address that. I have to go to I have a conflict right now, so I'm going to give the gavel, move the gavel to my extreme right and give it to Senator Pavley to conduct this hearing.
All right. I was told that would be a good thing. Sure. 434.
You had already presented your first bill,
That's right. Before you.
so you're safe here.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to bring forward Assembly Bill 434. I'll begin by stating that we will be accepting the committee's amendments, and we appreciate the ability to work with your staff in making this bill a better bill. AB 434 is a bill that is necessary to provide clean, safe drinking water to many communities throughout the state of California, particularly areas in the eastern parts of Coachella Valley and the Central Valley. These areas lack the resources necessary to connect to the centralized treatment facilities and as a result lack access to reliable and clean drinking water. The bill will ensure that communities who need access to clean drinking water are able to access it by allowing the use and installation of point-of-use and point-of-entry devices. With that, I would respectfully ask for your aye vote. With me, we have a couple of folks that are sponsors of the bill that will be speaking as well.
Well, let's hear from them. Your first witness.
My name is Luis Olmedo, and I work in the entire Salton Sea region, and I've been working with the Coachella communities for, I would say, about 6-7 years. And I'm very familiar with the over 100 parks that exist in this area. They're dependent on groundwater, and really their only means of clean water is a point-of-view system. Many of these communities, the majority or all of them are farm working communities. They don't have connections to a central water system, and therefore many of these have very deplorable conditions, I must say. I'm here in support of the bill. Like I said, I work with the organization that is the sponsor of the bill. I'm actually here to speak on another bill, but I do want to say that there is a group out there called La Unión Hace la Fuerza, which means the unity makes force. And it's a group of farm workers that are out there that have been advocating, that have been stepping up, and that have been courageous enough to try to bridge the language gap. And many of these communities have been courageous enough to step up and have a meaningful voice on a lot of the policies that are happening at the state level and try to make that connection to resources. But they're a long way from really having a meaningful voice in policy and even bringing down resources. So it's really dependent. These communities are really dependent on pretty much the willingness, the political will of the local levels, the regional level and state level. And so with that said, I just want to say that I really support this bill, and it'd be nice if we had the ability to bus people from those communities, because I think that they would really have a very clear message of the conditions that they live with. But I mean, if there's any specific questions, I'd be happy to ask. I'd be happy to answer them.
All right. Next witness.
Madam Chairman, members, Pete Conity representing the Water Quality Association and the Pacific Water Quality Association, and we are supporters of this bill, as we have been on other bills in the past on this issue. In a perfect world, everybody in California would be hooked up to centralized water treatment, but that's not going to happen in our lifetime. We simply cannot afford it. There are too many rural areas. There are areas like the sponsor talked about up and down the state, especially in the Coachella Valley and the Imperial Valley. And so there is an alternative, and this bill goes quite a ways towards allowing these disadvantaged, poor, rural farm working communities the opportunity to enjoy clean water. Thank you.
Right. Any other people wishing to testify in support of this measure by adding their name and affiliation? Seeing and hearing none. How about opposition? Quiet on that front too. So let's open it up for questions. But before I do, there was an amendment that was recommended by the chair.
That's correct, and we've accepted the amendment.
Accepted
Yes,
the amendment.
thank you.
That's to restore the 3-year limit.
That's
on
correct.
Using the technology. I wanted to make sure that was stated, and thank you very much for doing that. Senator Hill?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Assemblymember Garcia, thank you for bringing this issue because of the certainly the need and the importance to your constituents and to many areas of California. You know, I know in last year we had, as I chaired this committee, we discussed this issue in detail, and it looks like a kind of a normal conversation that we have in the Environmental Quality Committee. With the 3-year extension that was previously, and then now that the 3-year extension moving forward, is there a time frame in some of those districts where or those areas where we will see centralized treatment in the future? I know that just mentioned that not in our lifetime as some areas, but what's the future, at least in?
Well, I'll begin by saying that we would hope that in our lifetime we'll see the extension of this infrastructure be put in place in some of these remote areas of our district or other parts of California. The estimated cost in our region could be as low as $80 million and go as far up as $700 million. We're talking about mobile home park locations that are remotely located from the nearest centralized infrastructure. A lot of conversation has been discussed, and plans of moving forward with preparing engineering documents and what have you through the opportunities to access dollars from Prop 1B, the conversations related to drought and some of the trailer bills connected to the budget that we will be looking at in the next couple of days. Also, our conversations that assist in being able to plan for the infrastructure that hopefully at some point we can put an actual time frame. The original thought of not having a 3-year expiring date was to really give the local water agencies the ability to do some thorough analysis and planning. But, I think if it was safe to say that I probably will be back before you 3 years from now, unfortunately.
Maybe not me.
Well, some of you, and requesting for an extension. And I say that with full honesty in terms of where we stand currently with being able to put in the necessary infrastructure to no longer have to utilize these filtration systems. So it's a long answer to your question. But I think I preface it with giving you a lay of the land in terms of where we stand in terms of timeframes.
And I think that it's an appropriate answer, and I appreciate that. And I think it's important that we keep the amendment, as you've agreed to, the amendment, and we keep the conversation real and remind us of the need for a centralized system in the future. So I appreciate the inclusion of the sunset as we move forward, and the continuing inclusion of that, I think, is important.
Senator Hill chaired this committee last year, and we spent quite a bit of time, but I thought it would be relevant to have Rachel give us a quick update on what the State Water Board's doing. Remember, last year we moved a lot of this access to safe drinking water from the Department of Public Health into the State Water Board. My understanding is they've just released some information or report. Rachel, if you wouldn't mind.
So, as you all know, we transferred the program as pursuant to last year's budget. The State Water Resources Control Board just released their required update to the drinking water plan last week that has a series of actions that the Water Board will be taking in the near and long term in terms of prioritizing those communities of the state that I know, Senator Hill, that you have commented with considerable concern about those 3% or so of the state that have longstanding history of not having clean drinkable water. They additionally are doing evaluations of the state in general in terms of water quality standards and have a series of initiatives, as the Assemblyman has mentioned, that the administration will be pursuing through trailer bill language. But the drinking water plan goes to great detail on how the Water Board is going to prioritize water quality, drinking water quality in the short and long term. And hopefully we won't be back here in 3 years looking for that extension because they have really taken a different direction for the state.
Right, thank you for that. Any other questions by members of the author?
Yes,
Senator Jackson.
Having chaired this committee in the Assembly a long time ago, thank you for bringing these bills. You know, this is just an incredible problem in a state where water is such an amazingly scarce commodity, and I'm glad to see that efforts are now being made to address this issue. It's just it's critical to sustaining our health here in California to provide this kind of protection for water. So as you were talking about the programs, I'm hoping that they will happen in our lifetime. So moving forward, I want to move the bill because I think we just really, this is an urgent issue. So thank you for doing so.
Senator Jackson's made a motion to approve this bill as amended. If you would like to close.
I just respectfully ask for your aye vote, and I appreciate really the understanding of the circumstances that exist throughout the parts of California that continue to lack just this basic need, which is clean and safe drinking water. And I too hope that I don't come back 3 years from now, but nevertheless we are prepared to continue to take on whatever short-term efforts we need to put forward to ensure that people do have safe and clean drinking water in the interest of public health for California. So,
thank you for bringing this to our attention. And the motion again is do pass. Is it to appropriations?
Do pass as amended to appropriations.
Okay, do pass as amended to appropriations. Roll call vote, please.
Item 7AB 434 by Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. The motion is to pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wajkowski, Gaines, Gaines, aye. Bates, Bates, aye. Hill, Hill, aye. Jackson, Jackson, aye. Leno, Leno, aye. Pavley,
Aye.
Pavley, aye.
thank you.
All right, leave the roll open for absent members.
Okay.
It's enough to pass. Congratulations, and you're staying put, are you not?
Okay, all right. We do.
Item 10.
Okay, we'll
1059.
thank you again. And I'll start off by stating that we will be accepting the committee's amendments as well to AB 1059. This bill will improve the public health for the communities along the California-Mexico border region by expanding the Cal Enviro screen to capture relevant environmental data. The Air Resources Board has done a good job in incorporating many types of environmental data to its Cal Enviro Screen 2.0 tool. However, the Air Resources Board also acknowledges that there are gaps between the U.S.-Mexico border environmental data. The border, as we all know, has some significant environmental stressors. Those stressors are particulate matter from idling, associated vehicles associated with border wait times. At the same time, traffic density in Mexico, adjacent to California communities, add to that stressor, and of course, many water quality issues along the border. The Assembly Committee on the Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials held a hearing this year in the city of Calexico to help address some of these issues and craft policy, and here's what we have before you. This bill supplements those efforts and will help improve the health and safety for the disadvantaged communities along the border region of California. I respectfully ask for your aye vote. With me is Luis Olmedo with the Comité Cívico, who's also worked on this issue.
All right, thank you very much. Witnesses in support?
My name is Luis Olmedo. Thank you for having me, members of the committee. I'm the Executive Director of Comité Cívico del Valle, a nonprofit organization in the Imperial Valley that advocates for disadvantaged, underserved communities in the U.S.-Mexico border region. Comité Cívico was founded in 1987 by farm workers with the endeavor of improving the lives of underserved communities in the U.S.-Mexico border region, and our mission continues to be to serve the underrepresented or underserved communities in the border region by way of education, capacity building, civic participation. We also advocate for residents' education and participation in research projects. AB 1059 is an important piece of legislation for the border communities along the California-Mexico border. This bill will help improve access to health and environmental data in the California-Mexico border region and would give guidance to the Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment for a strategic approach to gathering relevant data to update the Cal Enviro screen. This could also help formulate action plans to mitigate environmental concerns which have been identified along the border. OEHA, Office of Environmental Health Hazards, and California Air Resources Board both acknowledge the deficiency and have recommended further studies. For example, according to the United States Department of Transportation, over 1.1 million trucks, 27.5 million personal vehicles, and over 100,000 buses crossed the Mexico border in 2014. As a result of the volumes of vehicles combined with the border wait times, border communities in California are significantly burdened with poor air quality due to idling trucks and vehicles that contribute to negative health impacts. Because of the interconnectedness of California and Mexico as it relates to the economy and goods movement and waterways that are polluted by discharges of waste from domestic and agricultural and industrial sources in Mexico that flow north into California, into the Imperial Valley, into the Salton Sea, which threaten the public health. It is no surprise why counties like Imperial have one of the highest asthma rates in the nation, highest among hospitalization among school-age children. Given the dynamics of the California-Mexico border region, whereas there is insufficient data that exists, AB 1059 will provide agencies with indicators such as traffic density, PM 2.5, which Imperial County does not meet federal standards, PM 2.5, PM 10, ozone, to name a few. Concentrations such as diesel particulate, as well as toxic releases from hazardous waste facilities and generators. This is quite useful and pertinent information to incorporate on the existing CalEnviro screen, as it would provide a more accurate picture of the border region and disadvantaged communities that are disproportionately burdened by pollution. I like calling it rural equity for the border region. Thank you, committee, for allowing me to speak today. And I just want to say on behalf of the border region, where my family has lived for 3 generations, and I'm raising my 3 boys, 3, 8, and 14. I think they're also becoming advocates, and they're much more informed than I was at their age. And so I'd like to ask that that you support this bill. Thank you.
And thank you for coming to Sacramento and sharing that information with us. Very important, and it is about the children a lot and public health. So let's see if there's anyone else wishing to testify in support of this measure. Any opposition? I would suggest there shouldn't be opposition to this. So let me open it up for senators. Any comments or a motion would be in order. Senator Gaines?
Yeah, if I could, just a question of clarification, because we talk about the air quality aspects at the border, and I'm wondering if there should also be a process in terms of what's happening at the federal level in streamlining that process, because when you have people waiting for such a long time, cars are idling, you know, you're creating a real problem. And I don't know to what degree you've engaged with that issue or not.
So we've been working closely with a former colleague of all of you, former Senator, now Congressman Juan Vargas, who represents the border region of Calexico and San Isidro points of entry. This year, the federal government committed $98 million to address some of the border infrastructure needs, expanding some of the point of entry areas to California, which would relieve some of the border wait times that have estimated anywhere between 2.5 to sometimes 4 hours. You know, it's a unique situation when you live next to another country, right? In this case, that has anywhere between 1 million or 1.2 million in population. And so these issues are unique and create some very big challenges, right, as it relates to air quality, water quality. So we are working closely with our counterparts in the federal government level. We're hoping that that does come through, and that the expansion project there in the Calexico, Mexicali border entry is underway and will help address some of these issues.
Right. Thank you very much. I'd like to make a motion.
Thank you very much, and thanks for asking that question, because we do need a partnership with the federal government on this issue. Any other comments?
Please.
Senator Leno?
Thank you. I want to commend your creativity, Assemblyman, because this issue of lack of relevant data for purposes of the CalEnviro screen is not limited to this very needed area of greater attention that is highlighted in your bill. In San Francisco, we have a neighborhood of, it was a former shipyard, and somehow it slips through the screen and is not recognized.
Because they have ocean winds.
As it should be. And so there's a lot more work to be done statewide. I know our colleague, Senator Lonnie Hancock, has some areas in the East Bay of San Francisco as well that is environmentally degraded and, again, somehow slips through the screen. No metric is going to be perfect, we know that, but again, this is a good way to address the situation in your district. I'm happy to support the bill.
Well, thank you, Senator, and I'd be remiss if I did not, in full transparency, give credit to where credit is due. This is a bill that was proposed by the local community, Comité Cívico, the executive director who's here, members of the Imperial County community that have been working on air quality issues for many years now. And so I as their representative, bring this proposition forward, and just thank you for acknowledging the creativity that's coming directly from the people on the ground that are trying to make a difference.
Great.
Come back for Richard. There's already been a motion.
Is it as amended?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that, and that sounds like an excellent close, if I may suggest that. And the motion then is do pass as amended to appropriations. Roll call vote, please.
Item 10, AB 1059 by Assemblyman Eduardo Garcia, do pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wieckowski, Gaines, Gaines, aye. Bates, Hill, Hill, aye. Jackson, Jackson, aye. Leno, Leno, aye. Pavley, Pavley, aye.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members listening.
Thank you. 2 for 2. And it's file order, correct?
Yes.
So we're on file item 8, AB 649, Senator Patterson, Assemblymember Patterson. I'm not going to give you a Senate title yet. I have to leave, so what would you suggest?
Senator Gaines.
Senator Gaines, your file item 8, sir, if that's okay?
Great, wonderful. Welcome, Assemblymember Patterson.
Thank you very much.
You're bringing forward AB 649. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Appreciate the opportunity to present AB 649 to you today. First of all, I'd like to state that I am glad to accept the committee's recommended amendments. 649 will ensure that our law enforcement agencies can continue to operate pharmaceutical take-back programs in the communities that they serve. Currently, there are at least 85 police and sheriff's departments throughout the state who offer these take-back programs to collect unused prescription drugs. This keeps dangerous drugs out of water sources, off our streets, out of kids' hands, out of our waste handling facilities, et cetera. These programs are successful in disposing pills, but collecting and paying for and taking individuals in our police departments off duty for transport has created some real significant issues. So with limited options for disposal, law enforcement agencies have 2 options: to ship the collected pills out of state. That comes with a very high price tag, and also for transportation, and a very high price tag at the disposable end per pound. Or the other choice is to take officers off the street to drive long distances in California. Can be somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 hours each way. It takes officers an entire day driving long distances to get to 3 incinerator locations in the state of California, and then again must pay thousands of dollars for disposal fees. The LAO estimates that these programs collect about 200,000 pounds of home-generated pharmaceutical waste per year. And I think if we want law enforcement agencies to continue operating these important take-back programs, we really need to make more disposable options available, do so in an affordable, effective way, and in a way that is sensitive to the environment. AB 649 would permit law enforcement agencies that operate these programs to use a pharmaceutical incinerator for up to 4 times a year to dispose of these drugs on site once approved by the Department of Public Health. With these options available, agencies will be able to continue to offer this community service. It will continue to keep these dangerous pharmaceuticals off of our streets, out of the environment. We'll be able to have officers in our community stay in our communities, and also do it in a very affordable and efficient way, which we think means that not only are we going to see this particular take-back program continue to be successful, but we may very well see the capacities increase and the numbers of these drugs taken out of the communities and to a disposable facilities like we have here before us. With me today is Reedley Police Department Community Service Officer Julia Martinez, Tom Sheehy of the California Police Chiefs Association, and Aaron McGuire of the California State Sheriff's Association, who will speak in support of the bill.
Great. Please.
Mr. Chair, members, Aaron McGuire on behalf of the California State Sheriff's Association. We have approximately 37 sheriff's departments that currently operate drug take-back programs. We've had a strong interest in making sure that especially narcotics or drugs that are subject to abuse, Schedule II and Schedule III, are people have the ability to dispose of those safely and that they're not diverted to other things. We think this bill simply gives another tool and an opportunity for law enforcement to continue these important programs. So we're in support. We ask for your aye vote. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Julia Martinez with Reedley Police Department. As being a new community member with this for the last 2 years with the Take Back program, noticed firsthand what a burden it can be. It takes a uniformed sworn officer off the streets to accompany me, or whatever, how many units we take. One has to be in the unit to drive the 3 to 4 hours that we have to dispose of it, and it takes a full shift because not only do we have to drive there, we have to witness the destruction, then to drive all the way back. So we would now have one person off the street just for that, or if there's 2 vehicles, now we have 2 people off the streets. So it would be a great asset to have our own there due to the limited storage that we can keep them in each department. We probably can only have between 4 to 6 months to have a secure location in each department to monitor them. And with this bill passing, it could be just with finance reasons, but also just a community, because our community, this has become a huge success, not knowing. With the last 2 years, we average about 40 to 50 pounds, and that's just true weight, no packaging of just drugs coming in. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Yes, other comments?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tom Sheehy with the California Police Chiefs Association. Would concur with the previous comments and just emphasize that we think this measure will give law enforcement the flexibility and authority that they need under the law in order to dispose of these pharmaceutical products effectively and efficiently. We thank Assemblyman Patterson for his leadership on this issue. We think this is the right prescription, and we would kindly ask for your aye vote.
Okay. Thank you. Why don't do we have witnesses in support?
Kim Jones, Community Service Officer with Sanger Police Department, in support of this bill.
Great, thank you. Any other witnesses in support before I shift this over to Chair Wajkowski? All right.
Then let's hear from opposition. Is there any opposition to AB 649? Oh, okay. All right.
I have a comment.
So I'm Clerk.
Hello?
And I got Senator Jackson. Why don't you go? You have a question?
Thank you, yes. I want to thank you for bringing this bill, Assemblymember Patterson. But as I sit here listening to this, I think, why in the world is this the job of the police department and law enforcement? And some of you may know that for the past few years, I have been working on this issue to have drug take-back programs that are actually being run by the industry, which is making billions of dollars a year in the profiting of their products, the pharmaceutical industry. And yet they do not wish to take any responsibility, and so it is falling now on law enforcement and on the taxpayer, because that's who's going to pay for this. So excuse me, I hope that as we go forward, and this certainly is, I think, is appropriate, a stopgap measure as we have, and even though we know that incineration can be problematic, it seems at this point to be the best option that we have available. So I thank you for doing this, but I would hope that as we go forward, that we recognize that it's really a shame that we have our law enforcement personnel doing this job, and that the true duties and responsibilities really should fall on the industry. That I think the estimate was $279 billion that they received last year, not necessarily all by profit, but it seems to me that this is an area where the taxpayer is having to pay the costs, and it's my hope that going forward, irrespective of the gentleman standing there with his hands crossed, we will be able to free up that taxpayer money and the work of our law enforcement agencies, which should be, I think, better spent doing what they would otherwise be doing with that time. So I thank you. I'm going to move the bill, and I appreciate your doing this, and I do hope that going forward, if you're interested, we can work together to find other options.
We do have a motion for clarification. In comment number 2, we have 2 proposed amendments regarding the approval date. By requiring approval, the language assumes the technology is going to be available, so we're asking that we strike approval from the language. Have you had a chance to look at these proposed amendments?
I think he accepted them.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Okay, good, good, guy. Just clarification.
Yes, gladly.
So it's as amended?
Gladly.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Wachowski, if I could ask your indulgence to make a comment. I represent a number of pharmaceutical manufacturers, specifically today Novo Nordisk. One point I want to make with respect to Ms. Jackson's comments, and the author and the supporters know this, the reason law enforcement is involved is because DEA requirements are that these drugs be handled by law enforcement. So regardless of the cost incurred, any take-back program will require law enforcement's involvement. So I don't want to debate Ms. Jackson's previous proposals, but I do want to point out that is why law enforcement is involved. It is not simply a cost. It is, in fact, federal law.
And for the record, please state your name and...
Jim Gross on behalf of Novo Nordisk. Thank you.
Perfect.
And if I may just respond to that, the costs for any of our law enforcement involvement is being borne by the taxpayer now. That's, I think, part of my point. And if we look at what some of our communities, including San Francisco and Alameda County and potentially Los Angeles, are doing to shift the responsibility, it is my hope that going forward that the pharmaceutical industry would be delighted to sit down and discuss this so that we can shift this away from the taxpayer and reduce the involvement of law enforcement. So thank you. Thank you.
Senator Leno.
Thank you. Assemblyman, I hope you don't feel hijacked.
No, not at all.
It's a broader conversation this committee has
Not at all.
debated for many, many years. I side with Senator Jackson on the debate. I just wanted to, first of all, express my appreciation to the committee for catching that suggested amendment of approval, and Assemblyman for you for taking it, because it did presuppose the outcome of an evaluation that is yet to occur. So it makes complete sense. And with that amendment, I think it's a stronger bill, and pleased to support it.
Thank you.
Others? We have a motion. All debate having ceased, would you like to add anything?
Just an appreciation for the opportunity to present and to point out that the amendment that we accepted was a surprise to me that we didn't have it in the bill in the first place. So thank you very much. The approval of the Health Department and all of those, it's very, very important for obvious reasons, and I appreciate the fact that you found the oversight. And with that, I'd like to ask for your support.
Assistant, please call the roll.
Item 8, AB 649 by Assemblymember Patterson. The motion is due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Senators Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines? Gaines, aye. Bates? Bates, aye. Hill? Hill, aye. Jackson? Jackson, aye. Leno? Leno, aye. Pavley?
Thank you all.
We have a member missing. We'll keep the roll open. Thank you.
Thank you very
Matters
much.
approved. Is this the grand finale? Grand finale. Item number 10, AB 888 by... Item number 9. AB 888 by Assemblymember Bloom. The motion is to do pass to the Committee on the Judiciary. Microbeads. Please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. AB 888 protects our oceans and waterways from a significant and growing source of plastic pollution. The bill prohibits the sale of personal care products containing plastic microbeads. Microbeads are very small scraps of plastic found in some personal care products such as toothpaste, exfoliants, and scrubs. And if I might show a prop and perhaps pass it around the dais, this is an example, and one can see the little blue and other colored, multicolored flecks of plastic in there. In some products, there are upwards of 100,000 of these little microscopic specks. And the problem is microbeads cannot be trapped by most water treatment apparatus because they're too small. Therefore, they flow out to our rivers, streams, and the ocean, where they pollute the water and are ingested by waterfowl and fish and persist and accumulate for extremely long periods of time. Therefore, the best way to stop plastic pollution from microbeads is by eliminating it at the source. The cost to local governments and taxpayers for installing the types of filters that would be necessary to get these microbeads out of the water at water treatment facilities is simply prohibitively expensive. For consumers, there are natural, non-plastic alternatives that exist to replace plastic microbeads. These are in the stream of commerce already, and many manufacturers of the plastic microbeads are already pledging to phase out their use. The bill is clear that plastics are banned, but these natural alternatives are allowed. In fact, the bill encourages the use of natural alternatives. The bill is also clear that plastic alternatives are not acceptable. To date, there are no products in the category known as bioplastics that have been proven safe for the environment. But we are working, my staff is, and proponents of this measure are working with the best minds in the world on assessing the safety of these what we consider promising technologies, who frankly have shared their concerns with the industry's requested amendments. And you have a letter from one of those individuals who is not opposing the bill now, who had just a week or so ago expressed some concerns with the bill. While we have made many concessions to opponents of the bill, the opposition continues to ask to make an allowance for biodegradable alternatives. This is a product formulation that has not been proven safe for human health and the environment. We can approve what are known as regrettable solutions that may be well-intentioned, but prove after the fact to be equally or more dangerous. An example of this was the disastrous use of MTBE as a fuel additive, ostensibly to reduce air pollution, a salutary goal, but as it turned out, a disastrous water pollutant. Thus, it is very dangerous for us to approve a product or a type of product that does not yet exist and cannot be assessed today for its environmental safety. A far better alternative, and the one we propose to follow, is to encourage and work with innovators to craft a process that identifies exemptions for new products that have been peer-reviewed and meet criteria that show they are safe for human health and the environment. We've had discussions with supporters and opposition around doing this, but it simply is not appropriate to incorporate into this bill. And I'd like to pledge today to continue the conversation about this topic with all stakeholders with the goal of bringing legislation forward in the next session. The continuing use of harmful and unnecessary plastic microbeads carries with it serious costs for our environment and on taxpayers for cleanup, if they can be cleaned up at all. Microbeads are a relatively recent addition to products, and the damage they are already causing may be irreparable. This bill has had bipartisan support, and I'd like to introduce witnesses Mark Murray with California, well, I don't see, oh, there you are, Mark. All he needed to do was turn left. Mark Murray with Californians Against Waste, Steve Wilson with an organization that has my favorite name for an organization, Story of Stuff, and Jessica Ganger with California Association of Sanitation Agencies.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Let's hear from the first witness.
Mr. Chairman, a big difference a year makes. The vast majority of the personal care industry has now recognized that we need a clear and consistent prohibition on including little bits of plastic in the products that we put in and on our bodies. The language before you is the clearest loophole-free policy in the nation, and when enacted, it will become the de facto national standard. I want to express our appreciation to your staff. You heard this bill last year. Your staff has stayed in the loop and helped us in terms of putting together this policy that we have here today, and we appreciate that. You're going to hear from opposition that is objecting to not what this bill does, but what it fails to do. And as this committee is very familiar, going back to 2004 and then updated in 2011, California has enacted policies that establishes rules for making claims of degradability and biodegradability as it relates to plastic products. That's existing law. Now, there's no product that can meet those standards. And in fact, the Attorney General has gone after plastic manufacturers that have made those claims. So that's a broader piece of existing law. And I think that that's what the author is proposing to do, is to address this question of biodegradable plastics, because it's not just microbeads. It's a broad range of plastics where packaging, agricultural plastics, where biodegradability, if we can get to that standard, may make sense. That discussion belongs in a broader bill to address the larger question of biodegradable plastics, not in this bill on plastic microbeads. Again, thank you for your time and patience on this legislation, and we urge an aye vote.
Next witness.
Mr. Chair and members, Jessica Gauger on behalf of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, here today as a co-sponsor and in strong support. Our membership is comprised of the major wastewater treatment agencies in California, who combined serve over 90% of the sewered population. The agencies are charged with protecting the public health and the environment in those communities that they serve. Plastic microbeads are washed down the drain as part of their intended use and do not break down in the wastewater stream. They're also what we call neutrally buoyant, so they can slip through the ordinary wastewater treatment processes that rely on sediments to settle to the bottom or float to the top in order to be removed. Research shows that plastic microbeads are being discharged in effluent into California's waterways and are harming the natural environment. There are some wastewater treatment plants with more advanced treatment that can remove microbeads. However, the majority of plants are not treating to this level, and the cost to upgrade all treatment plants to treat to this level to be able to remove microbeads is unknown, but it would likely be very high, and ultimately it would be the burden of local ratepayers. In our view, this is not a realistic option. It is our belief that this is a source control issue, not an end-of-the-line treatment issue. There have been some discussions about the need for an exemption in the bill for biodegradable alternatives. One serious concern our members have raised about allowing biodegradable microbeads is, what exactly do they biodegrade into? Yes, it is possible that some might be benign, but if they do break down into potentially harmful contaminants, this could ultimately impact a plant's treatment obligations, or worse yet, could still continue harming the environment. AB 888 is focused on banning the use of plastic microbeads in existing products that are on the market now. For these reasons, we're in strong support of the bill and would urge your aye vote.
Next.
Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Steve Wilson, and I'm the campaigns director for the Story of Stuff project. About 3 years ago, I was on an expedition in the Great Lakes with another co-sponsor, the Five Gyres Institute. And this is where we discovered the vast majority of these beads in the environment. We traced it upstream. We made a match to personal care products. And so we set out on a campaign to eliminate them from a source standpoint. Originally, I had a conversation with Johnson & Johnson about 2 years ago, and they voluntarily agreed to phase out polyethylene microbeads. The issue is they didn't tell me when they'd do it or with what they would do it. And they still haven't. 2 years down the road after taking a legislative approach, I had a conversation with one of their chief scientists about 3 weeks ago. And through a tremendous amount of sleuthing, I have been able to determine what their reformulation is going to be. The problem is we don't know exactly what it does in the environment. It may not be toxic, but what is the assimilatory capacity of the watersheds it's going into? That is, how quickly can nature process this stuff? Is it going to create a nutrient bloom? Many of these questions are unanswered by peer-reviewed science. We are working with the best minds in the country, as the Assembly member said, who are at Stanford and also in Albany working on these technologies, who have also expressed concern with industry exemptions. We've had very frank and very long discussions with them in the past 72 hours. And we believe that we now have the full brain trust to, again, revisit this. But what AB 888 is about is banning what's on the market right now. We can't crystal ball the future. We are doing the due diligence to look at industry's proposed ingredients. However, I wish your aye vote on this bill because I believe that it's more appropriate to deal with this in a separate bill later. Thank you.
Very good. Others in support of Mr. Bloom's legislation?
Mr. Chair and members, Christopher Castree on behalf of the City and County of San Francisco and the Office of Mayor Edwin Lee in support. Michael Pimentel with the City of Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti in support.
Good afternoon. Kathy Cole with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Our board voted to support this measure last week. Not only the water quality benefits are important, but also the protections for native fisheries in our rivers, streams, and the Delta, as well as our oceans. We urge your aye vote.
Members of the committee and Mr. Chairman, Sharon Green with the Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles County here in support. Thank you.
John Dane, Executive Director of the California Resource Recovery Association. We are in strong support of this legislation. Thank you.
Eddie Moreno on behalf of Sierra Club California in strong support.
Blake Kopshow on behalf of the Five Gyres Institute. We're a co-sponsor on the bill, here in support.
I'm Andrea Ventura with Clean Water Action, and we are also a co-sponsor on this bill. I just want to add that in addition to the other reasons to support this bill, I'm working on a stakeholder group working on recycled potable water, and we don't need to add complications to that issue as well as we strive to ensure we have drinking water for the future.
Steve Baker with Aaron Reed & Associates for the Monterey Bay Aquarium in support.
Claire Dasser on behalf of Ocean Conservancy in support.
Kelly Did on behalf of California League Conservation Voters in support.
Bill Alio for the Environmental Working Group in support. As Mr. Murray said with the Californians Against Waste, the Illinois version of this is a much weaker bill. This is the right way to go. Thank you.
You've got the best minds in Albany, City of San Francisco, Los Angeles. Let's hear from the opposition now. Opposition to AB 888, please come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Dawn Kapke with McHugh Kapke & Associates here today on behalf of the California Manufacturer and Technology Association and its member companies in an opposed unless amended position. And I do say regretfully so. We have been working with the author and proponents to try to find that middle ground to address the concerns which really go to the heart of what alternatives we can look to use going forward. And to the extent that we can address those concerns, our company companies have agreed to not only remove our position, but formally support the bill. The companies have already made that very firm commitment to move out of those polyethylene traditional plastic microbeads without question, and it had already agreed to do that long before any legislation had surfaced anywhere in the country. But in terms of moving forward and looking at alternatives, some of the natural exfoliants that are available, walnut shells, sugars, and what have you, do not necessarily work for every particular application, particularly when you're looking at over-the-counter products with active ingredients, consumers who may have an allergy to some of those natural things, walnut shells and others. That's not to say that they're not good alternatives, certainly, but they just don't work necessarily in every application. In terms of, going forward, our concern with the bill as currently drafted relates to the definition of a plastic microbead and the concern that the bill would ultimately ban some of those inventive new technologies that are being developed that are commercially available today. And importantly, you'll hear from another person to my right from micropowders about the fact that those commercially available alternatives are indeed biodegradable. They are tested by third-party labs against OECD standards that are the most stringent standards relative to persistence and biodegradation. Further, they meet those guidelines as part of moving forward in our really, truly good faith effort to try to address the concerns, work with the author and proponents. We've put forth well over 20 sets of different amendments on the definition of plastic microbead over the course of the last year and a half, really, truly in a good faith effort to try and find that middle ground. Our latest proposed amendments that you have all seen really were our effort to try and address some of the concerns raised by the author and proponents around concerns about persistence and biodegradability and what kind of guideposts and guidelines that would look to. Again, OECD as one example of a number of entities that have guidelines and standards in place. Those have been in place for a number of years, decades, I would even say. And those are the types of standards that the companies are looking to. They are standards that use a variety of tests against river water, freshwater, marine water as part of those testing protocols. And anything that would come out of that testing protocol that would be fragmented or what have you would not pass that. So the alternatives that they're looking at and requiring those third-party entities to meet are actually such that they have to pass those tests and for the companies to even consider them. In terms of, those amendments we provided to you, they were in a good faith effort to try and say, okay, there are guideposts in place that would potentially get to those concerns around persistence. Further, it's not often you have companies, industry-oriented entities coming to you and saying, we're open to further regulation. The language, again, was in a good faith effort to say if California wanted to establish its own specific standards for these types of applications, that we would be amenable to that as well. Certainly, we're open to a different approach on the language. I think part of the concern is we haven't made headway, and the concerns remain the same as we have relative to that narrow piece, the microbead alternatives that we would be looking at. In terms of also going forward with regard to peer review, these alternatives, again, do go through these testing protocols, and the testing protocols have been peer reviewed themselves, such that they use, again, freshwater, marine water as part of those testing procedures. It's not just out of the tap and just testing against just non-related natural environment type things. That said, each natural environment is somewhat different based on sediment flows and what have you. So the testing protocols try to set up the best mechanisms to ascertain whether these types of applications would be workable based on those protocols. So with that, and unfortunately, we must remain opposed unless amended at this time, but certainly truly want to be able to make headway on this in terms of moving forward with cleanup next year. Our concerns are the companies are reformulating now. A number of the companies have already agreed to phasing out long before the deadlines contained in the bill, which is certainly positive. Some companies may only have just one or two products to reformulate. Others have dozens. And so taking sets of alternatives off the market or out of the ability to use based on the language in this bill will hinder that progress in a much more expedited fashion and leave us with very few alternatives, potentially resulting in wide-scale products coming off shelves entirely. So for those reasons, we remain opposed to this amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions.
We'll get back to questions when we hear from the next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Richard Zarnecki, and I'm the technical director for Micropowders. We are a leading supplier of exfoliating products to the personal care industry. We are based in Tarrytown, New York, and our West Coast distribution is out of Berkeley, California. Micropowder supports the intent of AB 888 in phasing out traditional microbeads. We agree that petroleum-derived plastic microbead technology accumulates in the ecosystem and should be banned. At the same time, we are here today to present and support alternative materials that do not accumulate in the ecosystem and that are actually good for the environment. This innovative technology is exactly the type of scientific advance that California has been known to embrace and promote. We've spent the last 5 years at Micropowders developing a number of technologies that readily biodegrade in the environment. These materials are typically derived from sugar and are formed in a natural biofermentation process by microorganisms that feed on the sugar and produce a sugar-derived biopolymer. The new materials that we are promoting include PHB, PHA, and PHBV. These biopolymers have been demonstrated by independent third-party testing to rapidly biodegrade in soil, freshwater, and seawater using globally recognized OECD and ASTM test standards. These materials actually act as food in the ecosystem, where microorganisms use the material as a bionutrient. The only byproduct of this process is carbon dioxide. There are no toxic biodegradation products, and these materials are commercially available today. In fact, these sugar-derived biopolymers actually biodegrade faster in the environment than alternate materials such as walnut shells, as an example. And ground nut shells are not always a viable substitute because of concerns about allergic reactions to the consumer. So simply stated, we strongly support the elimination of microbeads that accumulate and persist in the ecosystem, and we strongly support the ability for industry to continue the ongoing transition to novel new biomaterials that break down in the ecosystem and do not accumulate or persist. For these reasons, we believe the bill should be clarified to ensure the use of these innovations. Thank you for hearing our position on this important legislation, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
I'm sure we'll talk more about sugar in a minute. Let's hear other opposition.
Mr. Chair and members, Maureen Higgins representing Biocom and AdvaMed, the Advanced Medical Technology Association. We are also opposed unless amended.
Greg Herner on behalf of the California Life Sciences Association, formerly CHI, and we are opposed unless amended. And because of the deadline in the bill, we'd strongly encourage the committee that has jurisdiction here to maintain this bill and its in committee while we work out these final issues. There's no urgency to moving this bill out today.
My vice chair has a question.
Just a question of clarification, because I want to make sure we're talking about the same amendments. So I know that Don made comments about amendments. Two other individuals have commented unless amended. I want to make sure we're all talking about the same amendments.
Yeah, we're all talking about the same amendments. Thank you.
Okay.
Anthony Sampson, California Chamber of Commerce, also opposed unless amended.
Tom Jacob on behalf of the Chemical Industry Council of California, opposed unless amended for the reasons stated. Thank you.
Dennis Albiani on behalf of the Grocery Manufacturers Association. We are opposed unless amended as well.
Terry Thomas on behalf of the Consumer Healthcare Products Association. Our membership are the leading manufacturers of over-the-counter products, many of which are the subject of this legislation. Thank you. And we are also opposed unless amended.
Hi, Beth Brzezinski with Procter & Gamble, opposed unless amended. Thank you.
Hi, Angie Minetti with the California Retailers Association, also opposed unless amended. Thank you.
This is unbelievable. It's like the opposition came up in alphabetical order as I'm crossing off the people.
We're very organized.
This is, okay, I have a question, and I hear from everybody. I'm looking at let's look at the Second Amendment that's talking about an alternative to the plastic microbeads that meets this relevant and established persistent guidelines developed by OECD, ASTM, and other comparable organizations. So just from a technical point of view, we're the legislature. If it becomes state law, we need to enact something, my understanding, versus delegate it to peer review or a third party, right? We can't do that. So I want to be sure if there were an acceptable level, right? I mean, we're going to get to the first part of the question, whether there's an acceptable level. But on that, I don't know if we can actually technically do that. Or I guess we could, it'd just be unenforceable, right? Yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, in terms of that, often times these sorts of kind of standards are provided, or the authority to develop the specific standards are delegated to the agencies that kind of have jurisdiction over that, in that they have the technical expertise on these issue areas. Certainly, again, this amendment was truthfully in an effort to try and have some sort of framework to work from, and in an effort to try and address some of the concerns and provide some semblance of guideposts around, the established standards that are already in place and what the state of California may look to as something that is acceptable, workable, until the state may decide to do its own. Also, I would note, as part of the Green Chemistry Program, Safer Consumer Products Program, the legislature set in place a few of the criteria, but ultimately delegated to the Department of Toxic Substances Control to develop more, kind of meat on the bone, if you will, regarding, those types of considerations. Not exactly the same, but in terms of the details of those sorts of things, Green Chemistry was set up so that the scientists could establish kind of the parameters for review of various materials and chemicals in products. But again, I mean, we're happy to even look at additional, different language. The key here is that it was our intent and our best effort to try and have some kind of framework to go by that would provide some guideposts and parameters. If it needs to be kind of a different framework than this, our interest is really that we're not cutting off the innovative new technologies that are already commercially available, but also a number that are still in production that rapidly degrade based on testing thus far, even faster than what's commercially available now.
Let's hear from the Assembly member, the author of this legislation. We're talking plastic microbeads and then their alternatives. So given your definition, it seems like some of these alternatives, sugar alternatives, may still fall into that definition. Maybe I'm just making that up.
Well, it's possible, and I think there's two issues here. One is the need to ban plastic microbeads as we currently know them. The second issue is there another category of products out there that we can agree on a definition for and determine a protocol for understanding their safety in the environment? That's going to take some time, and it's not a proper subject for this bill. The opposition naturally would like to incorporate it into the bill because it would give them a pathway forward. But I think the conversation that the committee just heard from the opposition indicates just how complicated the discussion is. And I think I would agree that the outside organizations provide us with some understanding of how we evaluate standards, and they might inform what we do as a state. But I think, Mr. Chair, you're correct. We need to control that process, and we need to control the criteria by which the state of California will determine product safety. Mr. Murray may have some additional comments that address this issue.
Mr. Chairman, just 2 points to respond. So you can make plastics out of sugar. Coca-Cola makes a plant bottle out of sugar beets. That bottle does not biodegrade in the environment. Simply because sugar is an ingredient in the manufacture of the plastic does not make it biodegradable in the environment. The opponents have shown us a laundry list of various standards, OECD standards, for breakdown of chemicals in the environment. Not biodegrading the solid material into natural materials, but breaking down the chemicals in those products. that may be a perfectly fine standard for chemicals that you might put in a detergent or something else to have them break down so that they're not toxic in the environment. But we're talking about is the accumulation of solid materials that we would all recognize as a plastic material, and that plastic material would continue to exist in the environment. There are no standards, no OECD standards, no ASTM standards that deal with the issue of plastics degrading through a biological process and completely breaking down in the marine environment. That standard does not exist.
Okay, I'm going to have you speak. Their First Amendment talks about that microbead remaining a solid. So if it's, right, I took basic chemistry, I get what I assume if we can reach what a definition is in a microscopic solid, it's either a liquid or a solid or a gas, unless, right? I don't know what, if it says, their new definition is saying it means an intentionally added solid plastic particle measuring 5 millimeters or less that remains solid when released into the natural environment. So if it becomes a liquid, educate me about the harm.
Well, I would just note that we had that very discussion with your staff and with the Assembly Committee staff, and I think that if a company would like to make a demonstration that provide the state of California with a demonstration, I'm not sure who that would be, but I'm not sure a state agency should incur the cost of doing that evaluation. If they believe that they've got a product that somehow meets this definition of a solid plastic microbead when it's in the bottle, but somehow when it goes into the drain, it is a liquid or a gas, I think that we're very open to that demonstration being an exemption, because that's not a biodegradation that they're suggesting. They're suggesting that it's a liquid.
It changes form.
Yeah, it changed its form. I mean, my soap changes its form when I'm down the drain. So it starts as a solid, and when I'm done with it, it's a liquid. So if that's what they're talking about through an exemption, that I'm not sure why that would be identified and covered by the bill as a plastic product. But if they want to make a demonstration that, hey, we should be exempt from this because it started as a solid, but by the time it goes down the drain, it's a liquid or a gas, it is not the intent of this legislation to cover that.
That would be your oatmeal enhanced soap that you're using at home. Let's hear from the opposition.
Question, follow up on that, please.
Senator Hill.
Thank you. The question is, what this bill will do is actually prohibit any plastic microbead or any plastic use of that in a microbead, regardless of its degradation, regardless of its composting ability or anything else. Now, I don't know if this will then limit any potential for creating a gas or a liquid as a result of future development. So you're saying that they need to come back and prove that it will degrade in some way. I'm saying that what we're doing now is actually eliminating any potential for anything. If we're saying and agreeing that it's acceptable to convert a plastic bead into liquid, and that's all right, then we should allow that. If they can develop that, they don't have to come back and prove it. The science and everything will determine whether it turns into a gas or a liquid. We shouldn't have to legislate that in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. I would just...
I wouldn't think.
I apologize.
Go ahead.
I apologize, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I would just note that we appreciate those comments. I think, again, based on what Mr. Murray has articulated, it was based on that conversation that we put together this language to try and get to that type of a concept. And so, again, these are the guidelines and standards already in place for, talking about persistence, looking at persistence and biodegradability. And so again, it was in that, kind of frame of mind that we offered these, which was tried to get there. Further, I would just note that the companies do require certification from their supply chain entities that would be providing these alternatives. And so that data, that certification, they're happy to provide that to the state if that's something that the legislature would like to ask for.
Sure. Just some of the comments that I wanted to...
Mr. Zarnacki.
Zarnecki, thank you. In terms of the comment that there is no existing test standard for biodegradation in a marine environment, I have a study right here, third-party OECD 306 test for biodegradation of one of our products in seawater. So that's incorrect. There are standards that have existed for many years. They work, they're effective. There are similar standards for fresh water, for soil. So that statement was incorrect. He was correct in stating that sugar can be used to make traditional plastic bottles, but that's not what we're talking about here. That is not done by a biosynthesis process. That is a typical synthetic process like we do when we make any kind of synthetic plastic. So the fact that ours is sugar and you can make a Coke bottle out of sugar is just confuses the issue. In terms of the fact that these types of materials, PHB, PHA, this is not new science. These materials have been around for a long time, and there is plenty of academic data and study on their biodegradation. So academia accepts that these are highly biodegradable materials. So I question why they're fighting something that everybody seems to agree in academia are very biodegradable, can be measured with test standards, and should be exempted on this bill.
Mr. Chair, if I might.
Mr. Bloom, yes.
This is a highly technical area, and that is, I think, fundamentally what the issue is with trying to come up with some kind of a definition at this point in time and why it's going to take time. Dr. Criddle, who is one of the foremost experts in this area, was in opposition to my bill until he read the very language that we're talking about that the industry is asking the committee to amend into the bill now. And in his letter that you have of June 16th, if I might read the language, he says, the proposed industry amendment creates even greater obstacles for development of truly sustainable and renewable materials. This is a Stanford scientist who is widely considered to be one of the foremost experts in this field. And I think Mr. Wilson can add some comments on this topic, if he might.
Mr. Chairman, members, discussing PHAs, which the gentleman from Micropowders is discussing, polyhydroxic alkanoids, of which if we think of PHAs as a genus and PHBs and PHVs as a species, these are promising biopolymers, for sure, without a doubt. The problem is the existing OECD standard within the methodology itself says that the methodology should not be applied to the natural environment within the standard itself. Our issue is that the standards that are proposed by industry, we don't think cover all the questions we have about this new material. So whatever it's made of is what it's going to biodegrade into. In the case of his product, it's going to be CO2 and water, most likely. I don't know the exact formulation. In the case of Mango Materials, it's going to be water and methane, because they're using waste methane as their feedstock. So this is a naturally occurring biopolymer. The problem is we have no statutory precedent on how to deal with it. Right now, in California law, you can't throw a banana peel out the window, even though it biodegrades and it's organic material. That's littering. And so what we're doing is making sure that we have to get this policy right, because it's going to have national and international precedent, whatever we do here. And so we have questions about not necessarily the toxicity of these biopolymers, but what is the nutrient load? The gentleman himself said this is food to a fish. It's true. It also has a prebiotic effect, which means it changes the gut flora of the animal that consumes it, and it changes their immune system capacity. What happens if 50 container ships of this stuff spill over in a given environment? Our issue is not with the innovation of this material. It's part of, in my view, part of the suite of solutions to plastic pollution. The questions that I have about it is, what does it do at exposure to an environment? And there are no peer-reviewed papers to say, if you dump a bunch of PHA in San Francisco Bay, what is that going to do to the fish populations there? Those studies do not exist. And so I guess my issue is we need to make sure if we're going to create a pathway for what I consider a promising technology, it has to be much more narrowly defined than what industry has offered. And frankly, it cannot be mixed with other persistent additives. In the example that Assemblymember Bloom showed of the Neutrogena product, you notice those microbeads were blue. What goes into that dye? What goes into copolymerizing? Because you can make PHA into something bad. Maybe this product is not, but what guidelines are we going to put around what PHA is actually going to be as a biopolymer? Because you can mix anything with it, make it persist and toxic.
And let me ask Mr. Bloom, and then I'll get to you, because when we talk about these copolymerizers, we don't want to. I mean, part of this is the toxicity or the nutrient overload or these other factors that may have an effect if we don't have the information. I mean, we're worried also about the toxicity of these plastics.
Exactly, and
but if we don't know what they are, I mean, there's a question of.
We don't. We don't know that. This is the kind of issue for which we have a regulatory process, which can stretch out over a very long period of time to determine the safety of various products. And, so we can, I would like to accelerate that process and try to bring back a bill that gives some definition to this category. But to do it in the context of this bill, we received this language within the last, I think it was about 3 weeks ago. Is that about right? 3 weeks ago. And you can see the conversation that has ensued since. Most of what you're hearing around the table has developed around this language that we got 3 weeks ago. And you can see how technical and how difficult it is to come to terms with it. One thing is for sure, the language that's proposed does not work. Will we continue to have a conversation with Ms. Kepke and opponents? Absolutely. I simply doubt that we can bring that to fruition before, hopefully, this makes it through a committee today and hits the Senate floor. We are now a year away from when this bill was first brought. The bill is essentially the same bill now as it was then. It failed for lack of a vote, and I understand that dynamic, but in that 1 year period of time, billions of microbeads have now entered the waste stream and are out persisting in the ocean. So the first responsibility that we have is to stop that flow. That's the way I see it. And you have my commitment that I will continue to work now. And, if we can come to agreement on language before the bill hits the floor, we'll amend it. But we need to move forward with this bill now to stop the flow of the microbeads into our water.
It's the second time I've heard that commitment. Okay, we got it. Mr. Zarnacki.
Yeah, just to the comment about that these, as I describe them, as food for the environment. If the bill passes as it's written and natural materials are allowed, almost all these natural materials are also biodegradable and are also food for the environment. And I wonder if there's been any studies done on what replacing all these non-reactive polyethylene beads with walnut shells that now the fish are eating, the microbes are eating, and what happens to the bellies of the fish and these kinds of things. It's the same effect. So to say that ours has to have extra study, but we can shift that entire load to walnut shells and other natural cellulose materials. They are also food, so they also will have an impact on those things that were brought up by the gentleman.
Fair point. My doctor keeps telling me to eat more oatmeal. So, Ms. Kopke.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just with regard to the toxic effect and potential for adding toxic chemicals to these alternatives, one thing to be mindful of that these companies are watching very carefully what their chemists and engineers are looking at adding, largely because we have Prop 65 as well as the candidate chemical list with the Safer Consumer Products Green Chemistry Program that ultimately could trigger additional regulatory requirements associated with that. So it is our understanding that that will not be a problem because those would then trigger additional labeling and other requirements. So they're very mindful of what they are adding to any particular product in the context of those particular lists of chemicals. And I would also just add that with regard to, kind of getting to middle ground and perhaps California would like to see kind of additional testing criteria and what have you for these types of alternatives that we appreciate that the proponents, are looking favorably upon. Perhaps in terms of expediting, the discussion to start with the OECD guidelines and what can we add maybe in addition to that would make the state of California feel comfortable. So we're not starting from ground zero, but we have some basis for which we can have that conversation, expedite that for the purposes of this particular bill. Further, if there are concerns about, the impact of that broader than this particular application, there are ways to structure the language so that it only applies in this particular case. And lastly, I would just add that, again, we are open to this, but the inability to come to that agreement and define, positively define that those may be allowable alternatives will ultimately take those innovative opportunities and ultimately hinder their ability to be used. Cleanup legislation that would even pass a year and a half from now may be too late for some of the companies that have already agreed to dates that are far before 2020 of phasing out. And so they're going to have to look elsewhere, and those options are not going to be on the table for them as they move to reformulate faster and to, the Assemblyman, the author's comments about trying to avoid additional microbeads, going into waterways and having that impact. The companies are not waiting till the final date of this bill to start making that headway. They're already reformulating products now. And so taking those options off the table, for one, are going to hurt those small businesses here in California that are working on those alternatives. But not only that, it's taking options off the table that the proponents even feel, are very favorable and could be very good options. So with that, I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chair and members.
Mr. Chair, if I could make one brief point.
Because I can't have all the fun with the questions. I have other senators that want to have questions.
Well, with the chair's indulgence, at the industry's request, we amended this bill last year to have an implementation date of 2020.
That's my
rush,
point.
We would have preferred a date much sooner.
4 years.
But we amended the bill, and therefore there actually is a lot of time before the industry has to make this transition. I just simply don't understand the necessity to rush this idea that may have a great deal of validity, that we need to agree on a new set of terms for formulation. That's why I don't wear a
I saw
watch.
your hand go up. Do you have something on this item, Ars?
Yeah, just very briefly, the comment about some of these particles are colored, and they are colored with food-grade colorants, just like the kind of colorants you find in Jell-O gelatin. So there's no additional hazards. There's no secret nasty things that are in there. It's the biomaterial, and if it's a colored one, it's got a food-grade colorant in it, and those are already in the system from food products. Thank you.
Let's go to Senator Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess I'm going back to what's in Assemblymember Bloom. This is a great bill. I supported it last year. The purpose of it is to eliminate those billions of microbeads that are getting into our water. That's what I think this bill should be focusing on, is what we're eliminating, not what we need. We're not looking for a pathway for the future. We're looking at what is causing the problem that we're faced with today. If it's a microbead that is 5 millimeters or less in every dimension, then and that does not degrade or compost or whatever it does, I think that's what we're looking for. And I think we should define it as that. Not look to the future, but let's see what exactly it is we're trying to eliminate. And that's what this bill should do. not look at the pathway.
Isn't that part of the amendment?
Well, that's part of the amendment, but I like the amendment of adding, if that is appropriate, the does not degrade or biodegrade as the, or does not get into whatever the natural environment, whatever the wording was. If that's appropriate, then that would work. That remains solid. If that's something that we want to eliminate, then that would be appropriate to me in the natural environment. I guess that's, I don't think we should look for the future in the pathway.
Let's go to Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As always, fascinating discussion. And I do appreciate the earnest efforts on behalf of the industry to express the concerns of your members. And I just want to suggest, taking off or following up with Senator Hill's comments, that this bill is very specific and it's focused. We've identified a problem, and this bill very graciously, I'm surprised to be reminded that the implementation date is 2020. It is 4.5 years away. So we need to proceed cautiously, especially at this time of severe drought, as to what further impacts we are placing on our water and our water systems. And there was a comment made during public comment that this can potentially, the status quo, impact our ability to recycle water for drinkable purposes. And so this has even broader implications than the traditional presentation of this bill. So with this very generous implementation date of 2020, I just wanted to ask the question that with this bill passed and implemented as law, under current law that this will join, should the industry come forward with something that is compliant with this bill as law, what is the process for it to enter into the marketplace as an alternative that, again, is compliant with the wording in this bill?
I believe we need to create a process.
So that would come subsequent to the passage of this, and we've got 4.5 years.
And I've committed to working on that process.
Okay, so that process needs to come together. And
Mr. Wilson is already trying to think that through. Dr. Criddle at Stanford is worried that the language proposed is going to be a bar to doing the kind of thing that he believes we can do.
Right. And I would
that
agree
will
with
be
you.
environmentally superior.
We don't need additional bars or hurdles, but I would suggest.
California could become the leader in this technology. We actually can be the place from which it emanates and really take a leadership role once again on a very important environmental initiative that will allow people to, have these kinds of products in a variety of different forms. It really could be a boon, should be a boon to the industry.
So
I apologize.
to pass the bill as it is written will be the appropriate incentive for whatever may come. We don't need to in any way dilute that. 4.5 years, a lot can get done within that time period, both on the part of further development within the industry and also your committed statements to defining the process by which industry will be bringing to us as alternatives compliant with this bill as law. So I'm happy to move the bill.
Thank you.
Whichever state is the leader in exfoliants better beware. Senator Bates.
Yes, Assemblymember Bloom, you have committed to providing or being concerned and supportive of the industry finding a pathway. It just doesn't seem to me that the bill as it's currently presented with only 4 years, that's a pathway if we're talking about R&D to the level that you are requiring to ensure that when it does biodegrade, these polymers that might be the answer can be tested. And I guess my question will go to the opposition. Tell me how much time your industry needs to have certainty that with the bill passed, they're going to be able to address that and not take these products off the shelf and, kill innovation and basically move those products out of the state so you have to go across the border to buy Neutrogena's, exfoliant. Because if other states don't prohibit them, that is another unintended perhaps consequence, but it will be there. Because I mean, we've all been involved with the technology advances, and we've been very involved in the advances in the world of biology. It doesn't happen quickly, it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without a lot of money invested. Why is a company going to make that kind of investment when there's no certainty that there's going to be in this house some sort of rethinking on the manner in which they're implementing this immediately? And 2020 in the world of science is pretty immediate when you have to look at the time in R&D.
When we hear from the author first and then Ms. Kupke.
I guess I'm saying you're not providing a pathway. You're providing a hill to climb, and it has so many potholes, pitfalls along the way. I just think that they say, okay, maybe some can make it, but many won't, so they're just going to eliminate those products. And the innovation that we're looking for that they've suggested here could actually answer the question and actually move California forward for the rest of the states in having a product that really meets all of the concerns that we have regarding toxicity in our water and in our ocean.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes, I think as Senator Leno observed, the bill really provides the impetus for accelerating the process, and that process is already underway. I think our witness from Micropowders has indicated that they think that they've got this worked out, and that may well be the case, but we have to have a process in place for evaluating that from the state of California's perspective. Dr. Criddle at Stanford also believes that he has to put it in the vernacular, the secret here, the solution that will help carry us forward. So I don't think that we are years ahead where this innovation might need that kind of lead time. I think we're on the verge of innovation. We need to stop putting this product into the waste stream. That will incentivize an even more accelerated process. And I don't want to say it a fourth time, but I'll work on it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And Senator, with regard to your question, the companies, again, are already working on reformulations now. As was noted in the analysis, a number of those companies have committed to dates far in advance of 2020. The 2020 date, as I understand it, was really speaking to some of the smaller manufacturers, as well as with regard to some of the over-the-counter products with active ingredients that have to go through an FDA process because of those active ingredients. That was an out-year timeline to look at some of those a very smaller subset of products that might need additional time to work on that innovation. But as you heard from Micropowders, the technology is commercially available now. But given those timelines, as was noted in the analysis, those timelines for a couple of those companies is by the end of this year. And so absent the ability for them to know that using those new alternatives is okay per the bill and would deem them still in compliance with the law as passed, they're going to have to look elsewhere or just reconsider pulling products off the shelves in order to meet that expedited timeline, which they want to do. I mean, they're looking to these new technologies to use now.
Vice Chair, go. Ms. Bates, please. Senator Bates, you have a follow-up.
Oh, I don't. So what do they do without the amendments you've proposed that would allow this specific alternative?
We have to go back to the drawing board, but those new alternatives that they're looking at would not be an option at this point. The bill's not clear that they're compliant alternatives.
So do they stop their research or their production on those at this point in time?
I'm not sure. I'd have to go back to the companies and member companies and ask that.
I know Mr. Wilson has been chomping at the bit to add a comment, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Wilson and Mr. Zarnacki, I know you guys normally don't appear here. This is a rather free-for-all committee hearing. It's an exception, so I keep ping-ponging and everybody gets in, but please, Mr. Miller, you have something to add.
Before Mr. Wilson speaks, I just wanted to add one thing that a reminder to the committee that I think might be helpful, and it's another amendment that we took. Some of these microbeads are contained in prescription products at the industry's request. Last year, we took an amendment that exempts any prescription medicine or product from the microbead ban.
Thank you for reminding us. Mr. Miller.
I just want to underscore that the motivation for the companies to reformulate quicker than what the law would require them to do is because they are losing a tremendous amount of business, because in the public space and the public discourse, people are unhappy about washing their face with plastic and brushing their teeth with plastic. So they are quickly trying to reformulate. Industry gave us guidelines for reformulation last session on AB 1699 that said 2 years. And we said, well, why are you asking for 4 years? They never answered the question. And to be very fair to the proponents of this bill, we literally had no idea what ingredient they were looking to reformulate to till 3 weeks ago. And it was not from them disclosing that. It was from a meeting while I was negotiating the federal legislation in Representative Frank Pallone's office in D.C., where his staffer said, what about PHBV? Knew nothing about PHBV at all. I have been studying all these other materials because I've been literally trying to figure out what are they going to use. When I have the discussion with Johnson & Johnson, contrary to what Ms. Kupke says, he did not disclose the ingredient to me either at that time, but I figured it out by the way he was discussing it. In that conversation as well, he also said that microbeads don't escape wastewater treatment and that he was going to provide me with a study that demonstrated that. He provided me with a study that was not peer-reviewed. It was a PowerPoint presentation from Temple University that didn't even demonstrate what he said it did. I had 3 other scientists look at it, and so this is not a proactive engagement of proponents on this bill. So to characterize it as such, or that we are being a barrier to innovation, is simply inaccurate. We've had to figure out on our own what they are doing. And so these technologies, though promising, are only going to scale because of microbeads. Their feedstock is way too expensive. They are not price competitive in the market. Most of the companies in the PHA game have been on the brink of bankruptcy for years. So this is a chance, well, it's certainly true of metabolics. And
I think, okay, hold. I still believe that the law requires some consumer disclosure of ingredients that we have, or does not. Vice Chair Gaines.
Yeah, I'd like to get to the issue, if I could, Ms. Kepke, in terms of the smaller companies that have to go through an FDA approval process, and what is that timeline, given that this would be effective, I think, 2020?
Absolutely. So just point of clarification, absolutely correct that prescription drugs have been exempted. However, there are over-the-counter products that have active ingredients that were not exempted as part of those amendments. As far as that timeline, I'm afraid I don't know off the top of my head, but I can certainly follow up with you and with the rest of the committee with more information on that.
Okay.
But as I understand it, that was the genesis for that timeline.
If I might, I don't think we have an issue with the small companies. They were largely represented by the Personal Care Products Association. They've moved to a non-opposed position, the association has. What remains are Procter & Gamble, Johnson & Johnson. That's who we've heard from. We have not heard from small companies that are opposed to this bill.
Okay.
Another question, if I could.
Go ahead.
In terms of the matrix, it's my understanding, and clarify, that there doesn't seem to be a matrix in place for a replacement, right? That if this bill moves forward without the amendments, there'll simply be a ban, and then the industry is going to have to figure out how to react, which in my view is not not a good process. I mean, why wouldn't we go through a process that would provide a pathway for the industry that would have some clarity in terms of where they could go with alternative ingredients so that there wouldn't be a disruption within the marketplace? And I just don't understand that.
We will go through a process. I doubt that there will be any disruption at all. There are natural alternatives that are currently in use, and there's no reason why we can't come to agreement on a matrix. But once again, we need to have certainty that the flow of plastic into the waste stream is going to end.
Okay, and would there be...
And that will help propel arriving in an agreement on the matrix. There's no question about that.
But shouldn't that be included in your legislation?
No, I think it's a topic for a separate bill. If we could find that answer within the limited time that we have in the legislative session, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to it. And that's why I've agreed to continue to work on it and have those conversations. But I want to point out that these conversations have been going on now for about 2 years, and it is only within the last 3 weeks, as Mr. Wilson and I have observed, that we have an inkling of what the products might look like, and that helps us determine what the process for approval of a new product might look like. We're not opposed to coming up with a pathway. In fact, we think it's a great idea to have that pathway. But as I think everyone in this room knows, not just on the dais, those kinds of solutions take a lot of dialogue, a lot of discussion, and a lot of time to work out. I'm committed to doing that. Mike, staff is probably not happy with hearing some of what I'm saying right now, because it takes an enormous amount of their bandwidth. We've put a huge amount of energy into this bill, and it's not been around the discussion of plastic microbeads and banning them. Even the industry is agreeing, if I'm hearing them correctly, plastic has to go. Yes. So, that part of what we're talking about here should move forward. It should move forward expeditiously. It's not going to be enacted until, or it's not going to take place until 2020. That's a long time.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your comments to the degree you've stated that you will work with the industry.
5 times.
I would appreciate that. I'm going to lay off the bill. I'd like to see what the final product looks like when it arrives on the Senate floor. I think it goes to Judiciary next. So, thank you.
So I'm going to close the debate on this now. I realize that there was a motion by Senator Leno, who has left the room. So I believe our rules require the motion to be made by somebody in. Thank you, Senator Pavley.
The bill 2020, if the banning this product makes sense now in light of the proponents' testimony here, water districts, et cetera. But having that relatively generous time frame of 2020, these people will work on it right away. You need to ban the product then. It's a lot of environmental regulations, especially the tougher ones. It's amazing what the private sector can do if they know they're going to have to make some adjustments.
So the motion is the bill as in print.
Correct.
All right.
Thank you.
You're the author, Assemblymember Bloom. Is there anything else that you want to add?
I don't think there's anything more that you want to hear, Mr. Chair.
We could get that your promise for the sixth time that
I
you'll
will
work
be
with the
merciful and
opposition.
simply ask for your aye vote.
Please call the roll.
Item 9AB 888 by Assemblymember Bloom. The motion do pass to Committee on Judiciary. Senators Wykowski?
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Gaines? Bates? No. Bates, no. Hill?
Aye.
Hill, aye. Jackson? Aye. Jackson, aye. Leno? Pavley?
Aye.
Pavley, aye. 4-1.
Okay, we'll keep that matter open. Thank you. All the matters that have been on the calendar. I'm going to open a roll on the other matters, starting with the consent calendar. Sorry about.
Let me find it.
6.
Yeah.
Madam Assistant. Gaines. Ted,
Okay.
you
Want to vote on the other measures, Senator?
vote on the other measures.
Item 6, AB 323 by Assemblymember Olson. The current vote is 6-0. Absent members, Gaines.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. 7-0.
Okay, that matter passed, that matter is approved 7-0. Consent.
Item 1, AB 273 by Committee on ESTM. Motion due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote is 5-0. Absent members, Gaines.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. Bates. 6-0. Item
Okay,
2.
That matter is approved 6-0.
Item 2, AB 274, Committee on ESTM. Current motion is due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations.
Fran.
Current vote is 5-0. Absent members, Gaines.
Maybe 274?
Right.
274.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. Pavley.
Aye.
Pavley, aye. 7-0.
Raise the interest. There she goes again. All right, that matter is approved 7-0.
Item 3, AB 275, Committee on ESTM. Motion due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member, Gaines.
No.
Gaines, no.
Okay, good.
6-1.
That matter is approved.
Item 4, AB 276, Committee on ESTM. Motion due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member, Gaines.
Aye.
Gaines, aye. 7-0.
Okay, that matter is approved 7-0.
Item 5, AB 21, Assemblymember Perea. Due pass to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent members, Gaines.
What's the bill number, Mike?
Oh, AB 21.
Senator.
Perea, you
Aye.
Item 5.
My numbers are different than yours.
Gaines, aye.
Aye.
Yes.
Matter is
7.
approved 7-0.
Item 7, AB 434 by Eduardo Garcia. Due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member Wykowski.
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. 7-0. Item 8, AB 649, Assemblymember Patterson. Due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 6-0. Absent member Pavley.
That matter is approved 6-0.
6-0. Item 9, AB 888, Assemblymember Bloom. Motion due pass to Committee on Judiciary. The current vote is 4-1, with chair voting aye. Absent members, Gaines. Leno.
We'll keep that matter on hold, on the call. Next.
Item 10, AB 1059, Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia. Due pass as amended to Committee on Appropriations. Current vote 5-0. Absent members, Wykowski.
Aye.
Wykowski, aye. Bates.
Aye.
Bates, aye. 7-0.
That matter passes 7-0. We have, thank you, members. I will stay here and keep the roll open on, or let's call the absent members on AB 888.
Item 9, AB 888, Assemblymember Bloom, due pass to Committee on Judiciary. Current vote is 4-1, with the chair voting aye. Absent members, Gaines. Leno. Aye. Leno, aye.
That matter passes 5-1. Our work here at the Senate Environmental Quality Committee is done. We are adjourned.